like, if you think about it, what is it that is required for a person to be able to learn is having their learning ability open. And that's the key, right? Because it doesn't matter what curriculum you use. And if you're just using a curriculum that's from school, why would you get any different result than school? We already know what the result is. You see what I'm saying? So why would you get any different result? And maybe we can go into what are we seeing as the changes taking place in the world, and then really why we need to have more effective education and so forth. Does that make sense? Because also it goes beyond just school education is my point. We can broaden the conversation, because when people think education, they just think literally school.
Yeah.
But people are going to need to change the way they're thinking about society and how we live together and what we accept. And that's what's going to be the key to changing the world to be best for all.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
And I think an important part, I think, is people don't really realize what we mean when we say like the school system brainwashed you. And that's every aspect in terms of the way in which we accept, say, the doctor's word as the end all be all, the way in which we just accept authority without any, like, I only realized what critical thinking was within the last like 3 months, about being like, oh, it's when you like look past the first conclusion that you're given and like actually investigate something and think about how all the pieces relate and all that stuff. I was like, wow, I didn't have that before I turned, 24. And that's like it's a shocking thing, right? And so
there's a cool book. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, called Thinking Fast and Slow. I think it's by Daniel Kahneman. It's a really good book, because it kind of goes into that point of how the first conclusion we come to is not always the correct one. So we have to then question that point. And that's very much in alignment with how we're approaching things, which is question what, you have conclusions you've already come to, you just don't realize it. And they're running your life right now. So being able to go through systematically and question those things, and then see, okay, well, what's the actual reason why I've accepted this, but then also what's the consequence if I live this out in the world, and then being able to look at it and trace it back to the starting point, right? And another thing too, you just said about the school brainwashing us. The school definitely contributes to it, but where does the brainwashing actually start?
In the home. Yeah.
Right. Because I mean, that's where by the time you get to school, you're kind of already brainwashed. So it's like you're able to fit into it. That's why I also say, like, there's no school that could support my kids, because it's going to require them to participate in things that they're not going to be willing to participate in. You know what I mean? Just sit in your desk for an hour and just listen to what this person's saying, whether they're interesting or not, whether they're saying something of value, whether you already know it or not. In other words, do something that doesn't make any sense, right? And so a school doesn't even accommodate for that. Like, why do I need to sit and do that? There was some game that Katie was playing with Max, like some like little computer game that she had found from like when she was a kid. So she like checked it out and she was like, man, I remember this game being really fun. And it involves like, I haven't actually seen all the details of it. I was just watching them play it a little bit together, but in it involves things like basic math, addition, and some things like that. And it's like you're this little scuba diver swimming around, like looking for like starfish, basically. And so they were just playing it together, and he was having fun with it. But it was interesting because he was telling me he just wanted her to do it. And I was like, why? Because he just wanted to sit and watch her do it. And I was like, why? And he said, it's too easy. Right. And then I was like, why did he say that? And she was like, because like he already knows everything in it. So the game itself is designed for 5 to 8, and it's designed to teach kids like basic math. But Max can already do all of the math himself already, because he learned it all in TechnoTutor. Yeah. So to him, it's like pointless. So he's like, well, there's no challenge for me to do it, so I'll just sit and watch you do it. Do you see what I mean? Like, watch Katie doing the whole thing. So he had no interest in doing it, right? Because he can already do. So in other words, that's what they're using to teach kids. But Max already knows the information. So now it's, what's the point of the game, kind of? So in other words, you're trying to use the game to teach kids math. Yeah. Right. But that's not the best way to do it. Why do you need a person swimming around with starfish to teach you math?
Because it's entertaining.
I mean? Mm-hmm. Right.
But that's a whole obsession with gamification and entertainment. But that's missing the whole point of like learning in itself should be fulfilling. instead of needing like, oh, I need the reward, I need the dopamine hit to motivate me. Like it's so silly that that's what we've accepted.
And that the learning requires sort of like a spaced repetition sort of model, right? When in fact, learning itself doesn't require it, but typically the performance of like becoming comfortable with performing it is what's requiring the spaced repetition.
Yeah.
You mean
and so the problem is trying to mix the two, huh?
You mean the understanding that you develop shouldn't require spaced repetition.
Well, it's like, how much spaced repetition do you need to put a resistor into an electric circuit? You just do it and it's done. Doesn't require repetition to do that. But in our current mainstream way of thinking about education, we think to get 2 + 3 = 5 or something like that into long-term understanding or long-term memory, it requires a bunch of repetition. But it doesn't require repetition. So like with Max and Seneca, when we build their vocabulary with Technotutor, it's not a repetitive point. You integrate it physically, right? Then the application of it, it's like doing it in different ways, doing it over again, like applying yourself, seeing the result and so forth. And so what happens is the child naturally wants to apply themselves when the vocabulary is already built in physically into their resonance, right? But physically built in, versus when you're trying to get them to repeat it so that they'll learn it.
Yeah.
And that's why they have to gamify it, because they're trying to get them engaged long enough so that they'll sit and do it over and over and over. But with the kids, Max can learn mathematics, what would take normally weeks for a kid to learn, you can learn it in a few minutes, literally, right? And then it's done.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can go apply it.
That's a really cool point, because I've seen that as far as the point of like gamification, where, you're trying to get a child to sit there long enough so you can teach them something. But I've seen with using Technotutor with kids like who are 3, 4, 5, that age range, where you would think, okay, they need some kind of like cartoons or some kind of funny voices or something to keep them engaged in this. But that's exactly the opposite of what's going on. Like we're sitting there, we're learning the exact material that needs to be learned the way that you would teach an adult, which is the coolest part to me, right?
That's so
and
true.
They are so engaged. They're actually giddy about it. They're more engaged than a lot of adults that I see, which is so cool to just see that, oh, the way that we've been going about, or like mainstream thinking about education, is completely wrong. It's completely just based on some ideas that I don't know why we have these ideas, but it doesn't need to be that way. You can actually just give the information that you would actually want to impart on them. You don't have to create this whole convoluted thing just to educate your kids, which is, like I said, for me, it's really cool to see firsthand, because I was kind of the camp, like even having used Technotutor for myself, I was kind of thinking like, well, you got to do something to keep the kids engaged. But now I see firsthand that's not the case at all. They are engaged. They want to learn. You just have to teach them in a way that actually engages their natural learning ability, and then they'll be engaged, versus trying to just entertain them in order to keep them still long enough in order for them to focus on the information potentially. Maybe.
I think that was probably the first thing that I realized before working with kids and being like, they're not going to want to do it and all this stuff. And then I work with a year or so ago, working with a 7-year-old, working with a 3-year-old, working with a 5. All of them are like, you can't get them off of it. You could just leave and they'll be doing it,
Yeah.
And it's just like,
yeah.
I was like, oh, wow. So when it's real learning and they're actually getting that feedback of, oh, I get it now. It's like, that's what propels them to keep moving forward. And
that's
one of the,
I was just going to say, that's a really cool point, as far as like they are actually getting it themselves, as opposed to just memorizing what you've said. They're like, oh, I get this. This makes sense. And that's what allows, because you'd mentioned earlier about critical thinking. That's what allows you to be able to do critical thinking when you get it yourself. When you've just memorized what other people have told you, you're not even actually thinking about it. You're just like connecting, okay, yeah, you said this and that matches with what I've heard before, which I don't know why that works, but sure, let's go.
That's what I was thinking of when Cameron was saying 2 + 3 = 5. 2 + 3 = 5. It's like, you can tell me that enough times and I can repeat it back to you. I can have that sound like just and like held in my mind, and then I can just like speak it out whenever I want. But if I don't understand the context to that, then you're right, there's no actual understanding. Where then I
So-
would be able to explain to you what 3 + 3 is. It's like, no, you'd have to repeat to me 3 + 3 = 6 over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. So let me give y'all some more context too, because something you said, Drake, that point of you have to teach in a way where it engages their natural learning ability. I just want everyone who's not having the context you guys have to really understand what we're saying, because what a person will tend to do then is go and take some other approach and try to fit it into that idea.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have to just be this way and I'm teaching in this way and therefore it's working. But let me be clear. There's like, you could think of it as like two different phases. One is you're integrating the vocabulary. And then the second one is you're applying that vocabulary and learning about the different relationships that the vocabulary has towards itself, towards past knowledge, towards the thing you're working with. So, and I'll explain a little bit more and then I'll give an example. So if you think about a computer, your computer has on it a physical circuit board, and it has a processor which has a specific number of connections, which gives it a certain amount of memory and so forth. And then you can change the memory structure of the computer to be able to understand certain information, right? But then there's the real-time application of the information. Like, for example, our computer is processing all the information, which is allowing people to hear our voices, see the pictures, and so forth, right? And it's obviously processing the inputs and all that stuff. So, like, for example, with the kids, we'll have our techno tutor and we'll put in specific vocabulary that we want him to have within him. Like, for example, the word resistor, the word circuit, the word diode. And just as an example of 3 words, you could put battery, capacitor, all those words. And I mean, we're showing this on our YouTube, the actual examples of this, of the result of it, right? We're not showing how we're doing it. We're just showing the results. So then he integrates the vocabulary. So now it's within him. So when he's hearing those words and I'm saying, here's what a resistor does. Here's how you use it. Here's what you do with it. Here's what happens if you don't have it. And he understands all the other words that I'm saying. Like, they're already within him. His body, his mind is processing everything I'm saying, and it's making sense because he already has the vocabulary as sort of the physical wiring within his own hard drive. Okay, it's like the base information is already there. It's like you can't your calculator, if you have just like a normal pocket calculator, can't do what your MacBook can do because of the difference in its physical vocabulary. It can't process the same types of information or as much information. And there's other factors too, like the amount of available RAM and things like that too. But generally speaking, it all has to do with the amount of memory, okay, and what's in the memory. So with the kids, we program in using TechnoTutor the vocabulary, and then we explain things to them using that vocabulary. So what happens is, because it's already a part of them, they're already more attentive and they're interested because there's no resistance to the information. It's not like you're hearing something and you're like, I'm kind of understanding. Like you're saying okay, if somebody was speaking fluent, let's say Chinese, and you don't know any Chinese whatsoever, you're just like, I have no idea what this person's saying. It's not making any sense. Probably after a moment or two, you're going to tune out. There's no way you're going to sit attentively for an hour listening to this person speaking Chinese and you're not understanding anything they're saying.
Yeah, that's
right.
And that's like when you describe helping a student with math and they read through the question and then they're like, what do you think you're supposed to do? And they're like, multiply something. And then you're like, okay. What is the question asking? And they're like, let me read it again.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the equivalent of
yes.
like,
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think he was pointing that way, but he was speaking Chinese. So I don't understand.
But my vocabulary is so effective that when I read the math question, as I'm reading it, I understand exactly what they're asking. I understand exactly what they're looking for. What they're saying is the problem itself. I also have all the context that they're assuming I have. And then while I'm reading it, I'm formulating ways of solving the problem, you know, as I get to enough information in the problem. So I'm not trying to figure it out as much as I am understanding it. And then, you know, maybe a complex problem where you have to sit down and work some things out and figure out all the pieces you're going to use to solve the problem. So with Max, he's able to, because he has the vocabulary physically integrated, he's able to understand and process things that someone else wouldn't. It's, and to contrast it, okay, I want you all to think back. What was a subject that you had trouble with in school, or where you just weren't interested in it, for example, or that when you took it, it was just like you did your best, but it really wasn't easy for you. It didn't feel easy.
I mean, that was me with math.
Okay.
Just generally math. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have something like that, Drake?
Not necessarily like that. It wasn't like most of my subjects were pretty easy.
What was interesting? Is there anything not interesting?
Not interesting? Yeah, for sure. I wasn't interested in history. Like,
okay.
At all.
All right. But are you now?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So, and then ask if anything like that for you that you can think of.
I learned history and French, so like it's funny because there's like French class to learn French, but we also learned certain other subjects in French.
Yeah.
And that I definitely didn't get anything.
Okay, so that's a pretty extreme but obvious example, right? So for me, when I was in high school, it was physics. And then even when I took physics in college, because I just didn't have the context for what any of that stuff meant, and didn't have any inherent, you know, and generally in my classes, I would do good enough, right? I graduated in the top quarter of my class, and, you know, I did very well. It was a private school, right? So if the person listening thinks back to a class you maybe had trouble with, it's like if you are talking about a subject where you don't already know what many of the components of that subject are, then as someone's talking, it's like you're not automatically kind of putting it all together. There's still things you're getting hung up on, whether you consciously experience it or not. So it's just not like a free flowing where someone's explaining something and you're getting it. Or imagine you go to your mechanic and they're explaining to you what was wrong with the car very technically, like they're talking to a mechanic, and you don't have that vocabulary. So you're like, yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. I guess you're saying that part's not working. Cool. But you don't really understand all the other points. Or you go to the lawyer and they're explaining to you all the details in the contract. And you're like, look, I just need to know, where do I sign? Are you saying it's a good contract or whatever? You go to the doctor, same thing. Because you don't have that vocabulary physically integrated. But if you had two doctors talking to each other, they'd be able to understand because they both have that vocabulary basically integrated, okay? So with Max, for example, earlier today, actually, I just put the video up on YouTube this morning. And I didn't actually show all of it because he was telling me a bunch of stuff. And then later he wanted me to make a video because he wanted to teach it to his bear. He has like this stuffed bear that the kids like it because I make it have voices. So I'll like talk like I'm the bear. So if I say, hey, can I make a video and ask you questions? They'll be like, no. But if I go, okay, can the bear ask you questions? They'll be like, okay, because they like that when that bear talks to him, right? So, but it's cool because he like wants to he wants to teach it, right? So anyways, he asked me to make a video, but before the video started, this is like probably 30 minutes beforehand, and then he came back and asked me to make the video. He was playing with his circuits and his electronic components and all that stuff. And he brought me this little circuit he had built. And it was like a battery connected to a resistor and a diode, and they had like a switch on it. And he was like, hey, Cam, he said, he was like laughing. He was like, I couldn't figure out why this circuit was working. I thought it was because I thought the resistor was too large. I thought it had too much resistance. But actually, it's because the diode was pointing the wrong direction. The negative was hooked up to the wrong part of the circuit. And he like showed me, he turned it around.
Rookie move.
It was working. And he was like laughing. It was like really funny to him.
Wow.
Because he was like, I thought the resistor was too much, but it was just the diode was on backwards. Isn't that funny, Cam? So that was without me interacting with him at all. Wow. So when you watch that video later, that's what he's talking about. But it was like the second time he's explaining it now to the bear. And so we're talking about different things as well. But my point is he's not even 4 yet. He'll be 4 at the end of October. So that's the middle of August right now.
Yeah.
And when you hear him, it's like he's not doing extremely complex things. If you understand electronics, it's not extremely complex. But to the average person, you're like, I have no idea what he's talking. You just don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And when you're in college or high school, you learn about circuits and stuff, and you'll learn about resistors and all this stuff in a physics course. But a year later, 2 years later, I mean, in fact, I'm assuming all you guys took physics. I took physics. We did circuits. We took circuits, right? We did circuit diagrams, all that stuff. We never learned about diodes. That was not even a part of the discussion. Now, maybe if you took an advanced physics course or something like that, you might have learned about diodes. But I only knew about what a diode was when Max started learning about circuits himself. I've obviously heard the term, didn't know what it was. I didn't know, you know, when you talk about LEDs, that a LED is a light emitting diode. What's the difference between that and a normal diode? I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I'm learning these things while he's learning them. And in the video, you saw it earlier, Drake. I don't know if you saw the whole thing, but because I know now, I was asking him, I had 2 different diodes, and I was like, and they had the symbols on them. And I said, what's the difference between these? And he's explained the difference between an LED and a diode, right? A regular diode and an LED, because a regular diode doesn't light up. It's not a light emitting. And he's explaining, well, you could call it a light emitting diode, he said. And then he said, but it's really a type of diode, right? And he's explaining what the difference in the symbols are. The fact that the LED has these little tiny arrows pointing out of it and everything. And that was stuff that I explained to him when I figured it out.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, because we were watching a video together. Actually, I didn't actually explain it. We learned it together watching a video, and the guy explains, and the reason why it has these arrows, because it's showing that it's emitting light and everything, right? So I guess the reason I like that story is because I have not already mastered electronics. Okay. I'm learning it just at a very basic level alongside him.
Yeah.
I'll learn it a little bit faster than he will, just because I have my techno tutor. I already have a bigger vocabulary than him. So when I'm watching a video and they're talking to an adult, they're probably still saying a lot of words that he doesn't yet have. Okay. That's why I wouldn't just give him videos for him to watch. I would want to make sure I understand what's in him. Plus, when it's a YouTube thing, the person who's making the video, they might be putting in like a lot of subtle jokes, or, you know, they might always be saying something like, oh, I'm a horrible artist, please forgive me for this drawing. You know, I'm not going to let him keep watching that, because that's programming him with this program of like judging yourself and all this stupid. It's like, I don't know if you guys find it annoying, but whenever someone makes this, and I know I sometimes do it myself, so I could see that program running there, right? Where it's like, oh, you know, it's like you're making a joke about something that you're actually self-conscious about. You see what I mean? And sometimes people maybe are making the joke deliberately on purpose to make other people at ease. So it's not that you have to just remove that totally out of your vocabulary. But the point is, I wouldn't want Max to be hearing that over and over. So I'm just giving an example of why I wouldn't just take anything and be like, here you go, whatever. It says circuits on it, watch it. I would watch it first, you know? So my point though is, when you look at the level of his understanding about the things that he's learned about, it's fundamentally different than, well, obviously any 3-year-old or 4-year-old, right? Unless the child was just one of these sort of special, you know, children who just happens to be a genius, right? You get those from genetics and so forth, right? It's very difficult to predict that kind of thing, and it's not by design. But with Max, his vocabulary is by design, right? And then we're introducing things for him to then apply it. So when he learns those words, and then we give him the circuits and the components, and then he's learning to play with them, he doesn't necessarily right away know how to make it work. But he persists. He will sit there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just building circuits and playing with circuits, because it's a part of his vocabulary, and no one's forcing him to do it. In fact, at night, I have to negotiate with him of like, okay, it's time for bed now, let's put the circuits away. You know, like he really wants to keep doing it. And he's not only playing with circuits, you know, he plays with toy cars and other things too. But as we develop his vocabulary more and more, he starts to have interests in those things, because it's like, you just imagine being familiar with something before you've studied it. That's what it's like when you're using TechnoTutor. And I'll just add another really quick point, because it just happened today. I've noticed now, because we've also been building his vocabulary with music, right? So sharp, minor, flat, you know, all that kind of stuff. And we have videos even from a long time ago of him recognizing musical terminology and so forth.
Yeah.
And pretty much every day he'll spend quite a bit of time on this digital piano that we have. And it has it has a library of music and sounds and different things on it. And so he likes to, you know, you can ask him what's a song that he likes on there. And then you say, well, what's the number in the database? And he'll know the number. you know? So he's just pretty much knows the entire music library of like 200 songs in there and knows what they're called and everything, because we're building his vocabulary, right? But the cool thing I noticed today is, and I've only shown this a few times, but the word track and recording, things like that are already in his vocabulary because of TechnoTutor. So today he's in there, or earlier today, he was in there recording his own music on the multi-track system in the digital piano. He like knows how to go and arm the recording, choose the track he wants. He knows how to save it. He knows how to overwrite it. He knows how to clear it out. He knows how to navigate to the selection of parts in the database where you can actually save your own songs, so you can't overwrite the pre-programmed ones. So he understands all of that. And I've only shown him that maybe once or twice. I never even really sat down and explained it to him, but he's observed me do it. And then he has all the vocabulary there. So he doesn't have like that resistance that this is something he can't do. So imagine he's almost 4 years old, and he's not watching TV. You know, he's not sitting down like just watching TV for hours. Instead, he's recording his own music. You know, he's still learning about how to actually structure a song. So it's mostly just him playing random stuff, you know, and then he'll layer over it, right? And then he's doing electronics. And then he's out there in the garden with Katie. And this is all vocabulary that we've built in. So when you look at, if you spend the majority of your focus on building vocabulary, not time, but just that's your focal point, and then you putting your children in environments where there's an opportunity to learn something about those words, the result is night and day compared to what the school system is able to achieve. But again, we can't blame the school system because Max wouldn't even be in school yet. So in other words, if people took it from the perspective of, oh, we should give vocabulary to our kids before they even get to school age, then you'll see, even if they go to school or not, because you might live in a place where you don't have a choice about it, you have to do, or you might have a circumstance where you have to do that, but they would have the vocabulary. School would be very easy for them, right? Because everything that they're being said, they would easily be able to remember what the teacher's saying in the particular thing. But then there's also the opportunity, because the vocabulary is already a part of them, that they'll say, that's kind of interesting, actually, what we're talking about right now. I'm going to go learn everything about it on my own. So imagine the kid who doesn't just wait for the teacher to talk about quadratic equations. They come to class and they're like, oh man, I figured out if you take two cones and you put them vertex to vertex and you slice them in different ways, that's how you get ellipses, and that's how you get parabolas and all these different things. And here's the applications of it. And they've already looked up, you know, parabolic satellites and the focal points, and that's where all of the rays go to. And like, they're actually understanding the application of it, which the teacher wouldn't, in most cases, even touch on, because they wouldn't have enough time to do it, because they're taking several weeks to learn this much of the subject. You see what I mean? Whereas my son's only not even 4 years old yet, and he's already learned, in terms of his knowledge and in terms of his application, more than a high schooler would in a year of studying circuits and electronics and so forth. Right? And to the degree where he can come up with his own stuff without me telling him what to come up with. Right? And then also, in addition to that, we can give him tutorials that we've checked out that we're satisfied with, and he can learn from those. He'll sit there and watch 8 parts of a series about basic electronics and diodes and LEDs and all this stuff. And he'll absorb that information, and then he'll come to us, and then we'll apply it and so forth. So it's a fundamentally different thing. So again, the original point I was trying to make, though, was it's not just about we're super engaging. We are doing this approach within ourselves as to how we explain things. That is actually all very simple and common sense. We're not applying any methods.
Yeah.
We're making sure that he has the vocabulary. And then also, guess what? We're not idiots. So because of that, we can actually understand the information. We can talk to him about it. All right. Now, if the parent is not well educated in that area, okay, then what could they do? They could have someone come in who's really cool, who's engaging in all that stuff, but understands how to have the child build their vocabulary with TechnoTutor, and then engage them with different projects and things like that. But my suggestion would be, as a parent, you should not accept this point that, well, I don't know any of that stuff. Okay, if you don't know it, is it important or not? If it is important, then you should learn it. If it's not important, why are you telling your kid they should learn it? You gotta make a choice here.
Yeah.
Right. And so why, as a parent, would you give yourself the excuse that, well, it's okay if I don't know any of this stuff? Then why are you getting your kid to learn it? right? And what's going to happen when there's no more jobs available in your field because it's been automated? What are you going to do? You need to start learning again as well. So that's what's so cool about it is, again, I don't know all about electronics, but I'm learning it as I go with him. So he's not totally surpassing me and I'm just like, oh, I don't know what a LED is or anything like that. Because then he wouldn't be able to communicate. Imagine he comes to me and he's like, look what I made, Dad. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I'm just placating because I have no idea what he's talking about. That kind of relationship, the kid would kind of be like, this is wrong. Why are my parents so dumb? You know what I mean? So, but that's what's so cool about this is it gives the parent that thing that would allow them to learn easily too. So it's not about a teaching style or a teaching method. It's about literally upgrading your ability to process information. That works for a child or it works for an adult. It doesn't really matter what your age is, right? What were you gonna, something you want to add something, Drake?
No, I thought of something earlier, but it's gone.
Okay. But you've been working with these kids, right?
Yeah.
And I know now you're looking into all this micro schooling, pod schooling, and people are talking about this. It's funny because to me, that's just another word for homeschooling.
Yeah.
You know, but you could either think of it as the micro school is the parent and the child, or it could be a person with multiple children.
Yeah.
There's going to be a limit to how effective that is if you have too many kids. But the cool thing is you could just build their vocabulary and then have cool projects. You don't have to focus only on what the kids' interests are. And I've talked about this before. Max is not inherently interested in electronics. We built his vocabulary. And then when we introduced electronics to him, he already could then process it. You see, so it's everything is in reverse of what people think. They think, find what the kid's interested in. That's the normal mode. Well, what if the kid's not interested in something? What does that imply? Right? And so it's a total myth that you have natural intrinsic interests. Your interests are based on what makes sense to you.
Yeah.
What is obvious to you in terms of that's pretty cool because I can already relate to it. I'm already familiar with it. So if a parent doesn't realize that, what they'll do is they'll just leave it up to chance and TV and all this other stuff. Like, think about this. What is a child's natural interest who watches a lot of Pokemon? Pokemon. Why? Because that's what they've been programmed with.
Yeah.
You see? So they're interested in it because they've been exposed to it. Because my kids don't have any interest in it. When they see Pokemon, it's just like, okay, like it's not interesting to them. There's something far more interesting that they can actually do something with that's real. You see what I mean? But maybe you could talk a little bit about what you've been looking at into Drake in terms of schooling, because I know you're starting to see like this context of how even within the concept of schooling, if you put TechnoTutor into that, you know, if assuming that the school is not too big, right? Yeah. Too many kids, they don't have enough because they wouldn't have enough attention, right?
Yeah.
What are you seeing in that?
So first, what I'm seeing is just how cool this time is as far as within education. Parents are now starting to take more responsibility for their children's education. They're starting to be more aware of that because they're seeing, oh, this system, you know, that provided for me, let's say, is not actually here for my children. You know, it's been 6 months that kids have been out of school, and they're talking about pushing those dates back even further. And so now parents are starting to see, and teachers are already saying this. They're saying, well, when your kid comes in, we expect this year, essentially, they're going to be behind. Not only are they going to be behind for this year, but it's going to take a while before we get back into like where they can be on track even. So they might be behind for this year, and next year they'll be behind then too. And so parents are starting to realize that.
Hold on real quick. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why weren't the kids just continuing to learn at home?
Right. Great question.
Is anyone even thinking about that? They're like, well, because they couldn't go to school. This is my point. Why weren't the parents just teaching the kids?
Yeah.
How hard is it? I know it's not hard. It is hard if you don't have the vocabulary. And this is the whole point, isn't it?
But the way in which we think about like teaching a kid is like, okay, where's the curriculum? What do I need to know if I was in school? But that same person would say, oh, I didn't learn anything in school. Most of the things that you learn in school, you just throw it out the window.
Right. And isn't every subject already on YouTube?
Yeah.
So is that even an excuse? But then you're like, well, how do I force my kid to do it? Right. And if there's no grades, how do I know if they learn it? And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I can tell if my kid is able to build an electronic circuit because it's actually doing what he's saying it's doing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I understand it because I can teach myself about it.
Yeah.
Right. But then of course the parent has to do their job, which is so far removed from the reality of their home life. It's just like they're living in these multiple different worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really the point there, is that the parents think like, okay, well, somebody else has to do this. I can't spend the time. Like, this is going to take all day. These are all the things that they're, that's their current vocabulary, right? Is that this is how school is supposed to be done. And so now this is really opening up the door or an opportunity for them to see, hey, you can build your vocabulary around school differently. And so it's really cool to see that with specifically micro schooling, because it is homeschooling essentially, right? But it's a new vocabulary, and they're open to learning this new vocabulary. They've got an idea of what homeschooling is already, and they think, I can't do it. But then you start talking about micro schooling, and they're like, yeah, okay, I'm interested in this.
As long as it has the word school in it, people are like, okay. But not homeschool, because that kind of implies I have to do it.
Right, exactly.
But also our
Somebody
vocabulary around homeschool has been tainted.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's been poisoned. That word has been poisoned, so that people hear it and they're like, whoa, that's like, you're not supposed to do that. But
Yeah.
micro schooling, okay, now you got me now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Drake, what is the definition of microschooling?
So a
So I just
micro
heard this
school
from you.
can be virtually anything. It could be homeschooling, unschooling. It could be a private school that only has like 5 kids in it, or it could be a small school that's got many locations all around. It could literally be anything. It's just not traditional school. And so
It's a smaller school.
it's a smaller school that anybody can, virtually anybody could found, you know? And so
you don't have to physically go to the school with all the other kids who are
Mhm.
not in your class, basically.
And you
Right.
don't need a certificate, any kind of certification.
No.
anything like that.
no, I mean, and obviously you have to
That's
check
great.
into, you know,
That would depend on your particular state or province or
Exactly.
whatever, whether you have to have
Right,
something.
right.
exactly.
But the concept itself, what is the
Yeah.
concept itself?
The concept itself is, look, the way school is right now doesn't work for my child. I'd like to have them in an environment where they're going to get more one-on-one attention, where they're going to have more freedom and maybe not be as confined to like the structure of the way public education system is. And so I'm going to find found a school that fits my child's needs. And that's basically it. And so you either find a small group that is in alignment with what it is that you see as valuable, whether that's, sitting in a classroom and drilling certain things, or it could be on the complete opposite end where you're never in a classroom, you're always outside. And like either of those things would be considered a micro school, but it basically puts the parent way more in the driver's seat as far as what education their child is receiving. They have a lot more say. They have direct communication with whoever is teaching their child, whether it's themselves or somebody that they've brought on. But it's really cool because it, again, gives you more responsibility as the parent, but it also gives you definitely more control over what's going on and more power into educating your own child and making sure that they're not being left behind by the public education system, which most kids that go through the public education system are being left behind in some way or another, right? And another thing is within a micro school, you can teach things that school's not going to teach your kid, like how to interact with society or like basic philosophy.
Money.
Money. Yeah, especially money.
Relationships.
Yeah, relationships. Like just, it's interesting in school. It's just like, this is the system. This is how it is. You go be an employee somewhere. But in a micro school, you can be teaching things like, I know some parents, they're going to want to teach their kids whatever religion they have. And I'm not saying that that's best or not best. Well, it's not best, but it gives you that freedom to say, hey, these are the values that I want you to have. That is actually important, to actually build principles for your child. So anyway, what I've been finding in talking to parents about this concept is when I share with them the idea of, hey, I will come and do a micro school here with your child, you know, and other children, they love the idea. And then they're also understanding that they're taking more control and more responsibility for their child's education. And so when I share with them, you know, how exactly I'm doing it, then they see that, oh, this isn't so hard. I can do this. I think there's a storm going on out here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's definitely a storm going on out here. So if you hear some lightning in the background, or thunder rather, sorry.
I wasn't sure if that was a background noise on a mic or what, but yeah.
No, that's thunder.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, then they realize, oh, I can do this too. And then they start taking the responsibility. Whereas before, you know, when I would tell parents, you know, you can actually really improve your child's education on a massive scale, their response is like, well, you know, school's already doing that, you know, or at least school's already doing enough. I don't have to do anything. But now they're seeing that is not so certain anymore. There's no stability within that anymore.
Nice.
Yeah.
You know,
Really cool.
it's fascinating because you have right now in the US this big debate about whether they should reopen the schools or not. And then a lot of people are saying, you know, the kids who, you know, can't afford the private schools and the micro schools or whatever it is, they're the ones that are getting left behind by the schools not being able to do what they need to do. But they're the ones who are already being left behind by the schools anyways.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? It's like the kids who are least the most disadvantaged, the school is helping them the least. So we have this sort of belief that you go to school, and by going to school, it's going to help you achieve in life. And that only made sense when the structure of jobs and everything was very heavily, okay, you have a degree, you can get a job, or you have a diploma, you can get a job. But it's not like that anymore. You know, now people are competing with degrees for jobs that would not even in any way require a degree. That's why I have all these people driving Uber and things like that with master's degrees, right? So the education, it's not really an education system, it's just a schooling system, you know? And when you look at how it separates people into classes and so forth, it creates a point perfectly for when you go to a job and you have, well, there's the management class, there's the executive class, there's the people who work in the mail room or the people in the warehouse. It sets you up for an environment where you're just around a bunch of people. You're all here for the same common purpose, but you don't really understand why completely, but you're just doing what you're told and you go to the next thing and everything is micromanaged. There's no self-responsibility really at all. Because even the kid who doesn't take any self-responsibility, their parents can just get tutors and so forth, and then they can make sure that they do their assignment stuff, even if the kid doesn't really take any actual responsibility within it. So it kind of brings me to this point we were talking about earlier about the gamification of things. But in the system that we have, you can game it. Do you know what I mean? It's set up in a way where you can, I mean, I know because I did really well in school, you know, relatively speaking. I was a National Merit Scholar. I got all the scholarships, all this stuff, and I put very little effort into school. I never did any homework. I mean, I remember the first time I ever did real homework, unless it was like, you have to turn this paper and you're going to fail. I would obviously do that stuff at the last minute. But the only time I ever did homework from the perspective of, I need to do the homework to understand so I don't completely fail, was when I took calculus my senior year of high school. That was the only time I can remember sitting down and actually doing homework. Everything else was copying something else, getting it done last minute, whatever, just because I had to. And I had courses where I didn't turn any homework in, and the teacher liked me. So they were like, okay, get all your homework in by right before the final. And I would do all the homework and turn it in right beforehand, and they'd still, you know, give me the credit or whatever.
Dude, that's like
my point is, you can game it, right?
That's exactly what Drake did.
That's exactly my high school experience. Like, to the letter. But this also brings up another good point of what we were kind of discussing earlier about what they're teaching in school isn't like real education. You know, you're talking about how it's creating this class system or this caste system. Whoa, lightning's getting pretty hairy out there. But it's creating this system where, oh, these are the smart kids, they're management material, and these are everybody else, they're the worker bees or whatever, and then these are like the really smart kids. They maybe be a CEO or something like that, but it's creating this separation that we have in our society. And then there's no systematic way, like we have a school that is systematic. There is no opposite to that, where it's teaching how the system actually works and what we can be doing to change that and really be improving our society and helping our society grow.
It's not designed to equalize things.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
designed to create the stratifications.
Yes.
And when I say equalize, and obviously if someone's been listening to our podcast from the beginning, they know what we mean by that, I would assume. But just for those who don't, equalization, normally people think that means you're sort of whatever the least person has, everybody should just have that. But that's not what I'm saying. Meaning I know for a fact that if a parent uses TechnoTutor and does it in the proper way, their child can have an equal vocabulary to my children. I know that. I know if a person uses it, they can have an equal vocabulary to me. So for example, in the context of a micro school or something like that, let's say you have the tutor / teacher, whatever you want to call them, and they just have 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 kids that they're working with. They can make sure each of those kids has an equal of vocabulary to the degree of what they're teaching. There's also going to be the influence of what's going on at home and the base vocabulary of the parents. And that's why it would be important that the child uses the TechnoTutor also in the context of their home, not only when they're in the school setting, but the point is that they could make sure that everyone has that equalized vocabulary within the particular subject matter or whatever it is. Right. So the whole starting point of what we're talking about with self-perfected everything is the context of everybody becoming equal to the highest standard, not taking everybody down. So just to be clear about that. Right. But it's funny because what the school system does is it just takes people based on where they're coming in and separates them based on that. So essentially, it's not 100%, but it's essentially the case that if your parents have money, if they're relatively wealthy, you will get more out of the education system. You will get a better job. It's pretty obvious and predictable. Now, that's going to change because there's not really that many jobs out there. I mean, yes, there are still some jobs, but the types of jobs that are going to be created in the near future and as we move forward are going to be jobs that require a higher level of vocabulary. It's not even education. It's just specifically vocabulary. Have you guys heard about this GPT-3? No, it's this new AI that they come out with. No. Oh, it's you got to look it up later. It's really cool.
Oh yeah, I have. Yes, yeah.
I posted some videos about it. Right?
AI, that one.
It's created by OpenAI, Elon Musk's foundation or whatever. What is it? It's this AI that I'll just give you some examples. I mean, it can do a lot of things, and people are still, because it was only really fully, I think, released to the public maybe a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. And now people are testing it and they're making videos of their applications that they've done with it. And some of the applications I've seen, for example, you can type in an app that has, that does this particular thing. You can describe the basic functionality you want of an app. And then the AI will take your description and build an app for you.
Oh, shit.
That does that thing. Okay.
Oh,
so and they were showing an example where they described an app that was similar to Instagram, and the AI built an app that looked a lot like Instagram. And it wasn't like it already knows, okay, if I get these commands, create the Instagram app. It's creating it itself. Like when you look at the way it's doing it, right? But it's able to take all this information. There was another part where when you're people are making different applications for it. And there was one where they were on Wikipedia, and they were on the Wikipedia page for bread, just the word bread, right? Which is probably this big article, right? And they they had a what do you call those things? Of like a plugin, basically, which you could then type into. So you're talking to the GPT-3, right? And they said something like how do you make bread not be too dry or whatever it was? And the AI put them to the part on the page that explains how to make bread where it's not too dry. And it didn't even say that in the article. It was just the part talking about the chemistry of whatever was required or whatever. So the AI was able to understand and figure out what would be needed, right? Those are just a couple of examples. There's a whole bunch of things on there.
Like way beyond Control F when you press find. It's like
because you have to be looking for a keyword. This is more like you're just telling it in human terms. How do I make bread that's not dry? And then it will go, well, here's the chemistry of the bread or whatever the particular recipe is or whatever, right? There was a whole bunch of really cool examples. And a lot of people are saying this is the next evolution of AI. There's never been anything like this before. And there was a guy who made a really cool set of videos about it and was saying, okay, I'm making this video because a lot of people were asking me, are everyone going to lose their jobs? Is there any point to studying coding or whatever? And he said, well, I would say in the near term future, you don't need to worry about that because, and they always say in the near term future, but then he also made the point, people always use this argument. The ones who are arguing against, you don't need to worry about it, or who are saying you don't need to worry about it. They've always said in the past that X technology was going to, so they've always been saying that there was always more jobs and everything, right? But the type of education required to be a computer programmer in an era where computers can write their own programs, like what kind of level of understanding do you need to have? Or let me put it this way. What kind of level would we as a society want those people to have in order to make sure that the computers are working properly? Let's think of it more like that. What kind of context do you want them to have? Not just, okay, I went to school, I passed all the tests because I fucking put everything in from searching Yahoo Answers and shit, and I got my certificate, so I got the job. Is that the person you want who's making sure that this system, which manages grain distribution or whatever the fuck it is working properly? You want them to have a total context.
Like the traffic light system. I've always thought about just all the different things we're so dependent on with computers and technology, where one little thing and you could cause a ton of consequence. And so that's a really good point of what do we want and what's acceptable for us as society, of the level of knowledge and understanding that these people have, and principles, really. Like that's part of self-perfected, and it's self-perfected not just today, it's self-perfected for life, for the rest of our lives and beyond. So it's not just like, oh yeah, let's live these principles now because they apply right now. It's like, no, we all are in agreement with this because this is what's going to guide us and support us in decision making for the next near future and way long term. This is wow.
I just saw this example because we were talking about the vocabulary you want people to have, right? I was just thinking earlier today, Seneca, she brought me, it's like a battery pack from Max's circuit kit, and she had put a diode across the two terminals, right? And so it was on, and she was like, look, and I was like, oh, here, let me take that, Seneca. I'm going to take this off. And I said, because if you put the diode on a circuit without a resistor, it could burn out the circuit, right? And Max was like, it's okay, Cam. It's okay. It's not going to burn out. And I was like, well, no, I'm pretty sure it has to have a resistor. And he goes, he takes the diode, the LED, and he's like, can you open it up? Because the way they're like snapped in these cases, right? And you can see the diode, the LED on the front, but then it has wires that go into the case. And then it has two parts to the case where they kind of snap in, and it's like, there's like a bottom part snap to the top part of the case. So all you can see is the LED kind of poking out the top. And he's like, can you take it apart? And I was like, okay. Because he can't get it with his fingernails properly, it's like, he's not strong enough for it. So I used my fingernail and I pulled the case off so you could see where it's like wired to the back of the little metal parts that you snap onto the other circuit, the other components. And I took it off and I gave it to him, and he said, see, look. And soldered to the LED's wires was a little tiny resistor inside the case. And he was like, see, it already has a resistor. And I was like, oh. What I'm saying, now how he knew that, he must have taken it apart, or maybe Katie took one apart at some point or whatever, and he noticed that or whatever. But my point is, he knew that was there. So he knew it's okay. It has a resistor. It's not going to blow it. You don't need to be concerned about it.
Lay off Seneca, Cameron.
You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. He's like, no, it's okay, you know, whatever. But that's like real, talk about critical thinking, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Mhm.
That's problem solving. That's
Mm.
understanding the consequence of something and what you would need to do to prevent a consequence and so forth, right? Just one example. So that type of thinking, you know. And so going back to the original point, this guy was saying there will be other jobs because every time there's a new technology, it creates new jobs. But we want people to be smarter, yes? Not just have a job. We want them to have a job. We want them to be able to make income. We want them to be able to survive and live. But just having a job, if we only think of it like that and we don't think, well, what's the education level? I mean, guys, the education system, the schooling system that we have around the world, you know, even you take the best education system, they don't have universal no people in poverty. You know,
Yeah.
if they're like, oh, like Singapore and all these countries, they still have people in poverty. It's still not taking care of everybody. And even if it's only working for that society, what about the whole context of everybody else, right? For the whole world, because everything is interconnected. And so if our society is going to continue actually developing and take care of everybody, getting better and actually progressing, we need to be able to raise up the collective level of education. And it's pretty clear if we just continue to think of education as the school system, and even if you take that same system and you just put it into a micro school, why would you get a different result? You're not going to fundamentally get a different result. And that's why I was saying earlier, it's not just about you being engaging. Okay, because even if you have a really great teacher, and everybody's had those great teachers, you still don't remember, or you didn't really learn anything. You know, you may have learned some things, but you didn't really take it and really go further with it. So because you didn't have the vocabulary
I learned how to
already.
be charismatic and funny. That's the only thing I learned from those engaging teachers is I learned how to like be enthusiastic.
Right.
I didn't learn
So you're just
anything
copying
about
their
critical
behavior and so
thinking.
forth, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So the point is
Yeah.
the ability to process information and problem solve, that starts with the integration of the vocabulary. You still want to have a person there to then engage with it and so forth. And that's why a part of, you know, when you have technical or whatever, you also get support where it's not just, here you go, see you later, because it's not just about putting a kid in front of a computer and then they learn everything. Human interaction and mentoring and explanation and so forth is a part of the learning process. But the point is, no matter how great of an explainer you are, if the child doesn't already have that vocabulary because of their environment in the first 4 years of their life, they're going to be limited. So if you take a child who did get a relatively effective vocabulary, how much could the parents, even if they're educated people, be making sure that they get an effective vocabulary in the first 4 years? And how much more could you accelerate that process if you had a way where you could do it deliberately in a systematic way? And then you put that into the context of children who are 7, 8, 9, 10. And what I'm seeing is you can really have a point where children start to then take more direction within it. And then the teacher within this micro school would be more of like a guide, right? More of like a mentor rather than just, you're getting everything from me. And if I don't explain it, you're not getting it. Because think of how much children like to play. They just want to play all day. Well, what if learning was like playing? And that's how it is with the kids, with our kids. They just like learning stuff. There's no now we're learning, now we're playing. It's just always playing. You know, in fact, Max was playing earlier. He had stacked the pillows up over him on our couch, like these long pillows, and he had stacked them up and he was underneath them. And he was like, I'm an LED and I have a capacitor on top of me. Like he's just using that vocabulary in his playing. So when he was telling me that I think he did it in that video, but he said that the components can talk. So he's like making them talk and everything. So within that, he's also learning and we're explaining stuff and everything, but it starts with the baseline of building the vocabulary. And so if you can accelerate that process and build in a lot more capacity for the child to have a higher vocabulary in those first years, there's a lot more that they're going to become naturally interested in. And I just really see by taking these principles and then putting them into the context of somebody who really cares genuinely and wants to support the children and be patient. Maybe you can talk about the role of patience and that point, Drake, because I know you've seen a lot of contrast within how typically parents or educators would be towards kids versus what your experience has been. Because I think that's the part that comes in where you're saying the teaching style. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
maybe you could talk about that.
So no, actually, what you explained earlier about the way that you're teaching was actually really clear context for what I was not explaining. But also, the patience does play a huge part in that, as far as with each individual child. You know, if you're sitting there and you're impatient about the rate at which they're learning, or about what it is that they're learning in the first place, if you aren't patient with them, they're not going to want to be patient with you. They're not going to actually want to sit there with you. They're going to feel all of that. Just think about, like, when you're in line and the person behind you is clearly impatient about you having a conversation with the cashier or whatever, right? And then you feel like, oh geez, like you feel rushed, like I gotta get sorry, or maybe you might resist the other way. And now we've got sirens going by, but maybe you might resist the other way and go, like, I'm gonna stay here longer and talk even longer, just to annoy them, right? It's that the same thing is going on within a child, where you're feeling impatient, they feel that, and then they're going to react to that one way or the other. Well, what I've noticed is when I work with kids, I'm very patient. I'm very just like open to actually,
like, give an
being
example
there. So sure. So I was working with this girl. Actually, I just met her for the first time this past week, and I was sitting there, and her mom was concerned that she had not learned her letters and numbers. She had already gone through a voluntary pre-K program where she didn't learn any of that stuff, or she learned some of it, but not really. Her mom was like, she doesn't know any of this stuff. Barely knows her colors and doesn't really speak that much. And she's already 4 or 5 years old, somewhere around there. And her mom was just telling me, I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. And I was just observing the way that the mom was with her, which was typical, normal mom stuff of, hey, I'll open this Play-Doh for you, but you can't mix the Play-Dohs. You can't mix the Play-Dohs. I'm like, why can't she mix the Play-Dohs? Like, that seems like fun. And she's like, well, because I don't like the mess. I'm like, well, I get it. You don't want to see the Play-Doh mixed together, but you can buy more Play-Doh. How much does Play-Doh cost? It's $1.50, something like that. I'll get you more Play-Doh if that's what's necessary. But just something as simple as that, right? Is something within the parent that's like, no, it has to be this specific way. They've got an image in their mind. It has to fit that image. And then anything outside of that image causes within them some anxiety, some impatience, some frustration, and then they transfer that onto the child. Well, later on, that child, I was just basically showing that parent how exactly I would work with that child. And I just showed them, look, this is exactly what I do. I sat the child there. We started learning some stuff using TechnoTutor, and the child was doing some things that I could see the parent was going like, are you sure this is okay? And I'm like, yeah, this is fine. This is fine. And within 10 minutes, I said, and that's exactly what I do every day. Can you do that? Can you just like be as chill as I was when she's doing all those things that you think maybe she's going off course or whatever? And the mom was like so relieved to actually see me do it. And her response was, wow, yeah, I could do that. Like that was actually a lot easier. Like she realized it doesn't have to be like just what I was just describing. It doesn't have to be this preset, I've got a curriculum that I have to follow, and it's got at this time, then at this time, and then you got to introduce this step and that. It doesn't have to be all that. It can be very laid back, very natural, and very fun for you and the child, there doesn't have to be a lot of pressure involved. But yeah, patience is huge, because I can give you another example where when doing the exact same things that I'm doing, another teacher is not being patient, and the child is sitting there going, why are we here? Because the teacher doesn't want to be there. Teacher doesn't really understand why they're there. And they've got clearly like 100 other things on their mind where they're having to control other things. And then they're like, well, I don't know if I'm doing this right. And to me, the answer is like, no, you're not. Because teaching a child does require you to be there, be present with the child at least, you know? It's like when you're having a conversation with someone, anyone, you don't want them to be like on the phone with somebody else or just like kind of ignoring you and just like watching whatever television, or and you're just like a background thing. You'd be annoyed by that. You'd be like, what the heck? Like, hey, I'm trying to talk to you. I'm trying to engage with you. Like, talk to me. That's the same thing as a child. Why would it be any different? Just because they don't have the vocabulary that you have, and so they don't understand everything to the complete degree that you do, but they still want to engage with you in that same way, right? And that's something that it's odd, you know, when you say it out loud, it's like, obviously, duh. But a lot of parents, the way they actually interact with their child is from the starting point of like, I'll get to you later. There's 100 other things I have to do, and which is understandable too. You know, you got a job, you got to make sure the child's fed and all this, and sure, you've got responsibilities, but
that's why processing ability is so important.
Processing
like,
ability, yeah, is really important.
If you feel like you can only like spin one plate on your finger at a time, then
yeah,
and that's not life.
But that's also why a nuclear family is very important as well, because if you were doing it all by yourself, you'd have that much more pressure and that much more that you actually have to tend to, and it's not. Well, I mean, we've made the case for it on a different podcast, so we don't have to go into it again. But you know, having the processing ability and being supported by someone who's on the same page as you is also really important to your child's education and should not be overlooked.
The responsibility should be higher for the adult than the child. People tend to reverse it. Like the child should have this high degree of discipline and focus versus the parent. And so, or they should be equal to the parent in their ability to focus. But if the parent wasn't doing something they already had the vocabulary for, they would have no interest. They wouldn't want to pay attention. You know, it's like if I sat the average parent down and said, watch this lecture about, you know, nuclear chemistry from MIT and watch the whole thing and just sit there. You'd be like, fuck, this is boring, or whatever you'd feel. Right. But that's what you want your child to do, because you didn't make sure they had the vocabulary for it to make total sense where they're engaged. Because like when I watch one of the videos, I'm like, this is really cool. Okay, wow, I didn't know that before. I'm actually interested in it. And you can watch anything, right? So with the child, they don't already have a lot of the context you have. So they don't even necessarily understand why they're doing what they're doing. So trying to figure all of that out is virtually impossible. It's very difficult. So typically the students who do well in school are there's the ones who are kind of like me, where you just have a natural, it's not really natural per se, but you have a good memory. So you can hear things, you remember it. It's sort of a survival mechanism. It's genetic. There's other factors to it where you can get by without really doing much. Problem is the consequence you only experience later when you actually don't know anything. And you're like, oh, fuck. You know, because like for me, I didn't want to go get a job, right? So now what? I don't know anything. If I wanted to go get a job, I mean, I went to the Air Force Academy. I have all these credentials and so forth. I could go get a job. Or I could play that game and I could continue and do all that stuff. I could have gone to grad school and do all those things. But I didn't want to go get a job and work for somebody. So, because all they would have cared about is my degree and whether I could sit and have a conversation or not. You know, and I'm not like a total weirdo. That's the interview process. They're like, oh, you're going to fit into the culture here or whatever. But I still would have had to learn whatever I needed to learn to do the job. And they know that. They're not looking for, do you already know everything? Now, if you had applied to be a computer programmer or a software developer at Google, they would have, they're not just only looking at, do you have the degree? In fact, now they're saying they don't even care about the degree. they're actually offering these certification courses where you can go get the certification, and then if you can do it, then they'll hire you or whatever the thing is, right? So that type of personality where you're just easily able to remember things enough to repeat it doesn't actually serve you. All it does is allow you to game the system. But then you have the other students where this is typically more a female thing, I've noticed, because I've worked with many different students. I mean, I worked with a lot of different students as a tutor. And I would have these students where their processing ability wasn't very high, but they would do what they're told. They would do what's being asked of them. So they would sit and they would study for hours and hours trying to remember what it was they needed on the test. It wasn't just like natural where you explain it. And it's like the other spectrum was the students, and they were typically more boys that were like this, where you could explain something to them one time, they would remember it well enough to do it on the test. So the reason why they needed the tutor is because they weren't going to sit and do it anyways. So just by having the tutor, someone was getting them to get familiar with the material. So you have both of those. And where the other personality, they would need the tutor for like 3 or 4 hours a week just to keep drilling them on the information so they could learn it, right? This is obviously pre-techno tutor type stuff, right? But the point is, those are the two personality types that tend to do well with grades and things like that. And both of those, though, if you're okay, I want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be able to develop the vocabulary for whatever it is you need to solve the problem in whatever business you're in or entrepreneurial type thing that you're doing. It doesn't cut it just to remember something short term, just so you can repeat it because you're trying to answer the question on a test. That doesn't get you anywhere because you actually have to solve a real problem that doesn't exist. That's the whole point of being an entrepreneur, is you're solving a problem that no one else is solving, or you're doing it in a way where you can make money at it and there's enough market space for you to be in there solving the problem too. You see what I mean? So you can't just get by based on I'm gaming the education system.
That's a really good point, because like I did the same thing, gamed the system. I had great memory, and I didn't have to do much. And so I remember like my first year of college, I tried to start a business online, and it didn't, there were things that I actually had to do, things I actually had to know versus, and it was weird because I felt like, I know I'm intelligent. Like I know I can just remember things, and like I'm smarter than most people and I can put things together kind of, but this actually required me to know things versus just memorizing them and going, oh, A matches with A. I actually had to go, this is going to interact with this over here in this way, etc. And I didn't have the capability to do that. And I thought like, well, maybe if I tried really hard, maybe I could do it, but I had no motivation to try really hard for anything because I never had to in the first place. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point, Drake. And I noticed that as well, where my coping mechanism was I would just take a bunch of notes and like I would just rewrite my notes over and over until it was held in my memory. Still didn't mean I knew it. But then as I started in the business world as an entrepreneur, that was my go-to coping mechanism, was just like watch the thing I need to know how to run this business and then write it a bunch over and over. But the issue is there is so much happening in the real world outside of the notebook, outside of the YouTube course or whatever you're learning, whether it be in school or real world, or whether it be in school or training to be an entrepreneur, like learning how you make money, to then actually doing it and then waking up day after day and sitting down at the laptop, even when you don't feel like it, and like figuring out the stuff or talking to clients and talking to people. And there's so much uncertainty happening all the time. It's like Asif was explaining, you can get really good at spinning a plate on one finger, but unless you have the ability to have 10 things going at once, spinning all those simultaneously for long enough and then keep it going, it's like, that's the art of actually making things happen in the world for real, in the world system. And the only thing that helped me actually be able to do that was TechnoTutor. Because now instead of spending 3 hours doing notes, I just put in the vocabulary, I listened to the course, like we were saying, and you're just receptive to it. And then you just go apply it. And it was so mind-boggling to me how simple it was, because I was so used to having to struggle. And I mean, you still have to push yourself, but it's actually possible now.
The equivalent,
That's natural learning ability.
yeah, the equivalent of being able to spin multiple plates uh, forever is having that as a system within you where that comes naturally, because your body does that no problem. Right? Your body's releasing hormones, regulating your breathing, your heartbeat, anabolic, metabolic processes, cell division, blood flow, so many different things. They're spilling a million plates. And so when we're talking about what comes naturally or what comes from your unconscious, that's what's coming from your body. And that's what you guys know, the concept of noise within, I guess, electromagnet. I think electromagnetics, but as well as just the difference between signal and noise.
Like static.
Right, exactly. Like if you're tuning a radio, you hit signal versus when you're in noise, or if you're watching a TV, that's all that stuff. You guys ever like not plug in your charging cable all the way, or have like a really shitty charging cable or something like that into a wall, and it makes like this like, right? It's coming from like electromagnetic frequencies. That's what thinking is. Thinking is when you don't have a sound connection in your brain where you just come to conclusions automatically. The thoughts are like having to think about things and try to figure things out. That's noise. That's like connections aren't proper. So it's like instead of 100% of the electricity going through the light bulb just to create light, it's creating a bunch of heat along with the light. And you're not trying, that's like the old school light bulbs, right? Because it wasn't really efficient, the filament. Or it's instead of 100% of the electricity going through a really well insulated cable into to power your phone, it's like some of it's being lost to noise and things like that. That's what thoughts are. It's just because things aren't connected properly inside of you, so that it's creating all these like outflows and noise and all this stuff. And that's the equivalent of you're like trying to figure it out because you're like, oh my god, how do I get the second plate going? Well, I have to manage this first plate. I can't do the second plate thing. And that's like the second plate just happens to be your child's education, where it's like that's the thing that I'll outsource because all I can focus on is maintaining my survival. Which I get that because that's who I was like, 2 years ago. I made that point before of like I was single. I couldn't even manage one source of income. But now it's like in a relationship plus 4 or 5 sources of income. It's like that. If you're going to judge somebody, judge on what they do, right? And the results that they're getting in terms of the way in which you measure change. Is like I used to feel a lot better about myself when I had energy clear and all that stuff, but I still wasn't able to like do the things I wanted to do. But as soon as I just started putting it into me as like neurological structures, because that's part of your unconscious too, right? There's like neurons like being like zapped with electricity all throughout your body. When that's automated inside of you, it's like what comes natural to you is X or Y or Z. And the way you get X or Y or Z is just depending what vocabulary you have, which is your interests. What comes natural to Max is like, let me just talk about things in terms of, circuits. Even when I'm playing, look, like I'm a diode with under a conductor or whatever the case may be. And back to that point of patience, I think really, I think one of the common threads I've seen within us is like as we naturally understood what actual learning is, like the idea of, oh wow, like I thought I knew stuff and I really don't. Like you guys all had that experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like we all thought we were smart and then we realized like we're really dumb, which is a good thing, right? Because it puts you in that state of like, okay, let me take on this new process that before I was like, haha, I got it all figured out. But then that's how you describe meeting Cameron Drake, of like, when Cameron's like, how's it going? You're like, oh, things are great. Terrific, whatever you're supposed to say. And he's like, okay, cool. Like, I know we get trained to say that because, positive thinking, we want to focus on what we want, but how are things really going? And then you really reflect and you're like, oh shit, like, fuck, like, okay. It's like, we all had that experience. And I think in that actually being self-honest and living by these principles, it's been so much easier to be patient with people. I remember one of the first like people I showed Techno Tutor to. There's a point when we showed the demonstration of how it actually worked, right? And people usually take, I don't know, 5 to 15 minutes with that. And my mom, she came from a third world country, had a grade 2 or 3 education, and it was reflected in, she took like an hour and a half. And the point that she was most impressed with, there's like, she got it. She's like, holy crap, I can actually learn. She was so confused. I remember she was like almost crying with tears about how excited she was. Like a little girl, oh my God, I got it, I got it, I got it. That's how she was doing. But the other part she was so impressed with is the fact that I just stayed with her for the hour and a half. And you guys know the presentation, right? And it was my mom. So she really likes talking. We talked a lot about it, a lot of stuff. We're spending a lot of time together, right? And then there was that point where I came down to learning, and it's like I just stayed with her the whole time. There wasn't any point in me that was like, oh my God, just hurry up. Like it's 9 o'clock. Like, can you just get, it wasn't any of that. I was like, it's okay, try again. And that was like, oh my God, like I've never even had that patience with you guys, because my brother was there too. She's like, I've never had that patience with you guys growing up. And that alone is like, wow. And the honesty is that didn't come natural to me. That's something I had to develop. Where, yeah, like in school, I would spend time teaching people stuff. But after like 10, 15 minutes, and they were kind of like, I don't want to. I'm like, all right, like, good luck. If you don't want to do it, it's fine. But just being able to understand what was actually imprinted in us in regards to learning. Like, you guys remember when as we go deeper into our process, it involves more and more reading. Did you guys agree?
Yeah.
It's like, you guys see all the resistances that come up just in regards to reading? Like just reading definitions of words. Oh no, this one has so many definitions. Like, oh God, like it's the end of the world, all that stuff. And then like the blogs, like, oh my God, we have to read for like half an hour. Like, this is crazy. It's like, could you imagine how much limitation we're accepting? Could you imagine like the figures who are most effective in this world, how they would have no problem if it was in line with what they wanted, right?
Dude, you don't have to imagine, like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, they say it in public. We read for 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
The average person won't read 6 hours in a month.
Yeah. 100%. And so,
you know what's fascinating to me, I just wanted to add this real quick, is I surprise myself sometimes because of when you have a high vocabulary, you take it for granted. And also be aware, having a high vocabulary doesn't mean you're always saying words that most people don't know. That's what people misunderstand about Trump, is they think because he speaks a certain way on a rally that he's dumb. It's like he's speaking to the vocabulary of the people that he's trying to influence. But I'll surprise myself because I typically don't, at this stage, question like a word if I understand it or not, because of the process of using Techno Tutor and everything. And the other day we were in the car, and actually I posted about this on Facebook, and Max said, why does the radio, because he likes to sit in the front, like in the driveway, we'll sit and we'll play with the radio and stuff like that. And he was like, why does it say aux? And I said, and I think he already knew the answer, but sometimes he likes to ask because he likes to hear me explain things sometimes, just so we can talk about it. But he was like, why does it say aux? Because he knew how to say it, right? And I said, well, it's an abbreviation for the word auxiliary. And he said, what does auxiliary mean? Right? And I said, usually auxiliary means that you're helping or assisting something, right? And he said, what does it mean in this context, right? Which is why I made the post, was to just the fact that he said, what does that mean in this context? Because he wanted to know specifically. But after I made that post, I said, wait, what does the word actually mean, auxiliary, right? Because I know it, but how do I know I'm correct, right? So I just wanted to check. I'm like, what does it actually mean? So I went and looked it up. And if you look it up, it's pretty much verbatim what I said to him. But my point is, how did I know that? Because it's a part of me. I wasn't like, I don't know. What does it mean? I just knew, well, it's basically like this. Now, if you go read the definition, I wasn't reading the verbatim, like word for word, but I said it usually involves something that when something says it's an auxiliary, because I was trying to give him the context for that particular situation, even though I didn't explicitly tell him that. I said it's usually when something is supporting or assisting something else, right? Or helping something, right? But that's what the word means. So in other words, when you integrate the words physically, you're not having to think about it. Versus when you took a vocabulary course in school or something like that, or an English class like we had to take in private school, we had to like learn all these vocabulary terms. They probably do this in public school too, right? But you had to memorize all these definitions, and you still don't remember most of them anyways. So it's not just you're memorizing a bunch of words, like you actually know what they mean. So you understand their context. So when someone like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett is reading something, they're not having to think about what each thing means. And not only are they not having to think about it, but in the background within themselves, they know what things mean. So when they're reading whatever they're reading, it's connected to a lot more information than, let's say, another person who's not them when they read something. The person may not be having this, they may not be thinking, okay, well, let's say they may be thinking, I'm not having to sit and think about what each word means. I know what they mean, but it doesn't mean as much as it does to, let's say, a Bill Gates. Because if I asked you what's the word auxiliary mean, the most average person probably is going to say, I have no idea. They may only know it in the context of aux is the aux cable in your car. They may not have any other context. But if you asked an engineer, they're probably going to be giving you like an engineering definition, for example, or whatever the context of that person's vocabulary is. But what you'll notice is the people who are the most influential in this world, they have these vast vocabularies where when they're processing information, it's connected to a lot of things. And it's kind of the difference between, I don't know if you guys know much about how quantum computers work versus like classical normal computers, right? But the way quantum computers work, or just quantum mechanics itself, quantum computing, is it's not a linear process where you go from A to B to C to D to get to the answer. It's like, imagine you have all of the answers as possibilities, and whenever you're in a certain context, whatever you're looking at, it's like, imagine these particular options. There's like 10 different options, and three of the options. Huh?
I got a good analogy for it. Okay. Imagine a square, right?
Okay.
A square, and you start in the middle, and then you fill in the rest of the square with a maze. And the maze has 16 different options. And only one of the options leads to the exit. You consciously would be the linear thinking process would be you go to hit this wall. No, not that one. Hit this wall. That, not that one. That one. Imagine the last one, the 16th one. Oh, I found the exit. Versus what Cameron's talking about, a supercomputer, a quantum computing. It does all of them at once and finds, boom, the exit.
Or even more, that's a really good analogy. Another way of looking at it to add to that analogy is each of the particular solutions has sort of a different probability or likelihood of it being the right answer. And if you think about it as like weights on a scale, the higher the likelihood is, like it has more weight. So it just kind of naturally, automatically goes to that solution. Right. And so when you think about a vocabulary and you're integrating things in a quantum sort of fashion, your vocabulary allows you to simply, okay, I know all of the possible explanations or meanings or understandings of this particular thing I'm looking at. And so I automatically know this is the correct one. It's sort of like your body's like, oh, here's the answer, without you having to go and sit there and think about it. So versus when we learn things through our memory, that's more like the classical style where you're trying to figure out, okay, is this right? Is that right? Let me check all these things. But when you're a child, you're actually learning in a quantum fashion. So the type of what you're learning in the childhood phase is being built in the quantum fashion, is what I'm saying. So that's the kind of access you have to it, versus everything outside of that first 7-year window is more in the classical sort of rote memory type of fashion. So that's why people tend to rely on the spaced repetition, because they're trying to drill it in to get it to be at that level of like that sort of, it. but you didn't have to drill it like that when you were a kid, not in the same way, because your natural learning ability is just picking up and absorbing things. Usually the reason why you would think you would have to drill it is because you just don't have enough vocabulary for it to make sense. Because when it makes sense, it's like, you've got it. But I guess the point I was trying to make there is, if you can put enough information in the way where it's really there physically, you're dealing with your quantum ability. And the reason why I say that, it may be difficult to really get this point across for everybody, but it's like, your body operates in a quantum fashion. That's how your body operates, versus your mind operates more in a linear fashion. So when you're memorizing stuff, the root of the word memory is the word mind. You're learning the information in a way where it's only in your mind. It's not becoming a part of your physical programming where it processes automatically. And the difference is, if you think about your breathing or your heartbeat or your circulatory system or your nervous system, it's happening all automatically. There's no linear thought process involved. Going back to what you were saying earlier about the thinking and so forth, right? There's no thought process involved. You don't have to think in order for it to happen. So when someone like a Bill Gates, it's not to say that they don't ever apply any thinking, but that would simply be because maybe they're looking at something totally new and they're trying to figure out what are all the possibilities. And so there is a point where thinking can be effective. But when you have an effective vocabulary that's physically integrated, you don't have to think as much. Things just come to you automatically. And then you can apply whatever thinking process into the thing that is totally new, that no one's ever looked at before, that you couldn't already have integrated into your physical understanding, because it's something new. And that's why the people like the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts, they're doing things that no one else can do, because it's totally novel to the degree that we as human beings understand reality, in terms of whatever particularly the problem is. But the people who just go and get jobs and work in a company, they're doing stuff that's relatively routine and rote. And wouldn't you agree with me? The more likely that your job requires some kind of novel approach to a problem, you're going to get paid more. So even in the context of a job, you can make a lot of money, relatively speaking, compared to other jobs. But if it's rote and it's just like anyone, like literally a computer could do it, you're not going to get paid very much. And that company, I guarantee you, is as quickly as possible trying to figure out how to replace you with a computer, because they don't have to employ the computer. They don't have to give it benefits and all the sick days and all the other stuff. And, we brought up the GPT-3 thing earlier. As I'm watching them explain it, I was explaining to Katie, I was telling her about, hey, have you heard about this GPT-3? Which is that artificial intelligence thing we were talking about earlier. And when I explained it to her and about the Wikipedia searching and all the different things that it can do, she was like, there go teachers, right? Because generally what a teacher is doing is such a limited thing. Now, in the context of what we were talking about, where it's like a personal, they're patient and they're really explaining things and they're helping guide the child's development and everything, which is a whole nother level of processing ability. You could not take the average teacher alone, just with what they know and nothing else, and put them in the micro school setting and get any different result than they're already getting. There would be the added benefit that there's less students, but you're not changing the child's ability to process information. You're not changing the teacher's patience level. And they're just going to repeat what they're doing in the school. But if you take the average person and you have TechnoTutor and they're using it for themselves and they're using it with the children, and at the very least, all they're doing is building their vocabulary in that quantum fashion like we're talking about, that alone, the child can then go and they'll be able to learn more even on their own. Yeah. And they're going to be more receptive to actually discussing new things and open to learning new things. And so it's not the teaching point that's so much of the issue. It's the child's ability to integrate the new information that's the major issue. And that's why people who come to me and say, whoa, have you thought about this type of school or this type of school? I'm like, it doesn't matter what kind of school.
Right.
Because whatever school it is, you're still dealing with the child's, whatever they were programmed with in their natural learning ability phase, that's what they've got to work with in terms of their processing ability now.
Yeah.
And so the point is increasing that capacity.
At the start, I don't know if it was while we were recording the podcast or beforehand, but that's what you were mentioning. I was like, it actually happens before a child
they go to school.
Yeah. That's the most important part. And along with what you were saying about how Elon Musk or Bill Gates, they have so much more context to whatever information they're looking at. they're attaching it to a whole network library of other information, and being able to see different parts of different things. It's actually on one of the global hangouts in the Self-Perfected group. Mitchell, you mentioned this a while back, where it was one of the ways of seeing what smart is being able to take seemingly unrelated ideas and seeing the connections between them. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, there's this really great book by Stephen Johnson where he highlights this. This is just a common phenomena that happens where the more connections you put together, the more innovation happens. That's why a city of, let's say, 10,000 people compared to a town of 100 people isn't just, 100 times more innovative. It's like, it's an exponential amount. If I butcher those numbers, just that's the principle, is that the more connections there are, it's exponentially, it's like Cameron's explained with the quantum
It's like
way
the
of
node of the network is connected to every single part. So if you add one
exactly.
part, it's connected to every part.
Yes. So then how you benefit from that is being able to have understanding at that instant level, like we're talking about with TechnoTutor, where you can take words and phrases and vocabulary from different walks of life. So circuits, and then history, and then economics, and then biology and things like that. And then you can start making connections between those. And that's how you get those truly novel ideas. That's why this is going to be so cool as we keep having more kids within TechnoTutor. Like, for example, Max, where he does music, and then he does circuits, and then he's doing gardening or whatever. At a certain point, he's going to start spouting out things that we've never even thought of, because that's where good ideas come from, is those totally disparate things coming together. And that's where you get the true novel creations.
And it's so cool because what was it? When Cameron was mentioning this way back.
I can't hear you, dude.
Oh, sorry. I went to thinking mode. I forgot what it was, but it was basically Cameron mentioning this point of about basically the solutions in this world are going to require much more creativity than we've accepted as a society. And he was saying, you're making the point of how the policy maker right here isn't an economist, so they're completely missing that vocabulary aspect, or completely missing that perspective of, if you implement this, how it'll actually play out. Yeah. And that's why there's so many times throughout country by country when they say, okay, we're going to implement this policy, crossing our fingers that the result will be this, but then it gets some of this result, but then it creates a bunch of these other outcomes and problems. And then they have to create new policies to fix that. And that's basically what our society is. It's a policy that created a bunch of fucking problems. And then we got to create more policies to solve that. And then those will create more problems, all because we've been specialized. And this is what we see. We see this, and you see this, and you see this. And this is exactly what Cameron was talking about when we're all operating within a company, and you have the mail people here and the accountants there and the marketing there. And they're like, you guys ever watch The Office? You guys all know The Office, right?
Yeah.
Stupid question, right? It's like there's points when the accountants aren't doing what the salespeople want them to do. So the salespeople are getting frustrated because they're not supporting them properly.
Yeah.
But it's because everybody's just focusing on their little thing and they're not really considering how it impacts the other aspects of things.
And they don't have that ability to communicate as equals. Because even if, like, you do specialize in the finance, and then let's say I specialize in marketing, and Drake specializes in some other aspect of it, even though we're all in our own silos, in a sense, if we have equal vocabulary and we have common sense to take time to chat with each other, that's then how we can act. Like, that's a best for all solution right there.
Well, and then
That's
having
so
the equalized vocabulary of doing what's best for all. Because
right.
in the context of that analogy you gave with the office, it's like those people are not considering what's best for everybody.
They actually don't care.
It's more of like an ego point. You know, remember that one where they have this dispute about whether they should get new chairs or whether they should get a new copier? right? But it's like
Mhm.
Pam wanted, I think she wanted the new, I forget which one it was. Like it was,
or copier.
I think it was the copier
Yeah.
because, or no, I think it was the chairs, whatever it was. But it's like she didn't want the crappy chair because she had to sit in it all day or whatever. But the other guy wanted the copier because he had to always do the copying or whatever. But she was the one who didn't want to do, or whatever it was. The point is they each had their own self-interest within the point. But in what Mitch was saying, it's like you could still have somebody who has a really developed vocabulary in a particular area, but we should all at least have an equal vocabulary within how our bodies work, how our mind works, how reality works. You see what I mean? And then you could still specialize in a way, but if I trust that you're doing what's best, I should still be able to check it. It's not that I have to trust you implicitly, but if I've seen over time and you've proven that you're willing to stand by these certain principles, then I can see, okay, I'm willing to communicate with you. I'm willing to look at what you're doing. You can specialize in that area. I can specialize over here, and let's come together and then let's communicate about what we should each contribute to the point or whatever. And so it's the equalization in our society of everybody understanding that we need to do what's best. That's not a part of school.
No.
Like, that's not a part of children's education. So as an adult,
That's the biggest part.
You know what I'm saying? If you're just sending your kid to school and they're learning how to basically go into the factory industrial system, who's developing their character? And it's not the parent, because they're not even seeing that as a part of the education. Their whole life becomes, got to get my kid ready for school. I know I grew up in that environment where my parents were not terrible people, but they just were trying to get work for survival and then do what they could in terms of maybe vacation, holiday type stuff. And then mostly got to get ready for school, got to get ready for work, and so forth.
Yeah.
And so who is taking responsibility for, how do I teach my kids to value all life equally and to consider the practical context of what a person needs or what another person needs or what's best for everybody? And so
let me ask you this. So people say, they look at a certain country. They'll say that country, they're more about individualism, and they'll talk about the pros and cons, and they'll say that country, is all about collectivism, right? They see everything as together. Put that into perspective in terms of, if we're moving forward as a society, the way in which we see things has to shift, right? And I wanted to get your perspective on that, Cameron, because it's like people are getting caught up in either group identity or being an individual, and like fuck being part of anything, and like so many different dynamics at play with having clarity.
It's not the individual or the collective, it's both. Right?
Your blog.
Well,
yeah,
that's from Bernard.
Yeah.
Bernard Pullman. Like, there's a quote. Can one of you look it up? I'm trying to figure out where it is. I was actually trying to look at it. Where he says it's not about the individual or the collective, but it's just, he puts it really effectively.
Is it in Creations?
Not sure. Individual.
Search individual and collective. All you get is
Collective. Bernard Pullman. Maybe it's just a quote somewhere. Let me see. Maybe one of you can find it. But from my perspective, it's like the collective creates a sort of agreement, and it's not everyone sits down and agrees explicitly. It's collectively, there's an expression of all of us. It's like your body is just a bunch of individual cells, but there's a collective, which is your body, the whole thing. If there's one part that's got really diseased, it's going to affect the whole thing. The body requires all the different parts to work together properly. And so you don't say, well, I'm going to give my kidney blood, but not my heart. You can't say I'm going to give my heart blood, but not my kidney, because eventually it's going to cause a problem. Yeah. That doesn't mean the blood needs the same amount of blood. Sorry, the heart doesn't need the same amount of blood as your kidney or your liver or whatever. They may need different amounts. But you wouldn't say, well, fuck whatever amount you need, liver. I'm just going to make sure my heart is good. You need to have it balanced properly. So equality in this context doesn't mean everyone has the same. It would be equal to what is best for that individual. And that's why I was saying earlier, it's not that each individual needs to have the exact same fully developed understanding of computer programming and this person as this person does in this other particular area. You could still have in society, people have more understanding, but you shouldn't have some people have an understanding of how reality works, meaning I was reading a book with Max last night. It was this book called One Morning in Maine. And in the story, the girl talks about, or she like gets a loose tooth, and then she's going to put it under a pillow and make a wish. And Max is laughing at it. And he's like, that's silly. And so we started talking about, okay, if I put my tooth under here, why would that make a wish come true? And he was like, yeah, isn't the parents just going to get it and they're going to be the ones that get them the thing? And I was like, exactly, right? And we've talked about this before. So imagine him, he still knows about the tooth fairy, meaning he knows that it's a thing people believe in or that it's a thing people talk about, but he doesn't actually think there's a fairy that's going to go and get his tooth. And he hasn't lost any of his teeth yet, so it's not like we're actually doing this, but I'm just saying, let's say he comes to me when he loses a tooth and he said, hey, can I put my tooth under the pillow and then we can play that game where like the tooth fairy is going to come? And I might say, okay, cool. If that's what you want to play, fine, I'll play with you. But I'm not trying to convince him that there's actually a fairy that when he's not looking goes and gets it and then leaves something there for him. I'm going to tell him, okay, we can pretend. And afterwards, I'm going to put a coin under there or whatever it is the thing is, right? And in that story, the little girl, she wishes for an ice cream cone, right? And there's a certain part where she's about to say what she wants. And the mom says, wait, don't tell me if you tell anybody, it can't come true. And Max is laughing at it and we're talking about it. And I'm like, if she doesn't tell anybody, how is she going to get it? Like, does this little girl have her own money? Max was like, I don't think so. And I'm like, it doesn't seem like it. So how's she going to get the ice cream cone? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's wouldn't you want to tell your parents?
Yeah.
Well, the only other reason you wouldn't is because they're not going to give it to you. But then how are you going to get it?
Because you believe the actual tooth fairy is going to come and give it to you.
Like it's going to magically give you an ice cream cone or something, just like with Santa Claus and all that stuff, right? But I'm explaining to him that's not how reality works.
What happens in the story?
Well, it's interesting in the story. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in between, but at the end of it, they go into town, and she is in this shop, and one of the guys is joking with her about one of the guys says to her, don't put your finger in the hole, otherwise if you don't, like, you'll get a gold tooth that grows in like mine. And he's like, and shows her his gold tooth, right? And the girl's like, oh, but I didn't know in time, right? I didn't know before. And then the other guy says, oh, don't listen to him, like, he's just whatever. But would you girls like a chocolate ice cream cone? Kind of thing. And then he gives her an ice cream cone. So it never says in the story it's because she made the wish, but it presents it in a way as if she just magically got it.
It came together.
Oh, serendipitous.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow. But what about the kid who makes the wish for the ice cream cone and they never get it? Because they live in New York City. And have you ever been in New York City?
Yeah.
If you go into the bodega or whatever, they're not going to be like, free ice cream cones for kids that are cute, right? I don't think that's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Somebody
maybe there's some bodegas like that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, it's a little bit rougher. Like,
No, there's those bodegas.
But there might be the ones that are friendly, right?
But ice cream for kids that are cute, and then you never see that kid again.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. They have those ones too. That's like the
Yeah.
Candyman, right?
Yeah.
But my point is, what about the context where the kid's in an environment where that's not going to happen for them? Because like in this story, they live in Maine, and it's like the 1950s or something like that, and everybody's friendly, and it's a totally different environment, right? And anyways, it has nothing to do with whether she wished for it. It was a made-up story anyways. It's not a real thing. It's a story that somebody created on purpose because they're trying to create this magical element. And as we're reading it, I'm explaining all of this to Max, right? So in other words, I don't want him to be mistaken or make an assumption that, because how does he know how reality works? No one ever told him. He doesn't know, right? And so what does everybody think is going to happen when you go to heaven?
That the floor is going to be paved with gold.
For jinns.
It's supposed to be magical, right? It's gonna everything's gonna operate based on this principle of magic, basically.
Yeah.
So that's not how it happens here. So why are we lying to kids and telling them there's a tooth fairy? When you're a parent, do you really think that tooth fairy is gonna come?
No.
Because you got to get money and you got to put it under their thing, because that's what the whole thing, right? You put the coin or whatever the thing is, right? But why is that even necessary? What's the purpose of that? You can probably look into the origins of it and all this stuff, right? Maybe it was because they would pull the kid's tooth out, and so they promised them they'd give them something for it, or I don't know. I don't really know what the purpose of the story or the origins of it was. But in other words,
look that up.
Yeah, look it up. But our education of Max at a more fundamental level than algebra and all this other stuff is, this is not real. This is real. This is how things work. This is how things don't work. So, and I even told him, I said, why would you want to make the wish a secret? Because they tell them it's like you have to be secret about it. And that's training the child to have secrets. Why do you need to have secrets? That's just so you can, and it's cool because with Max, there'll be times where there was one time specifically where he said he wanted something. And I was like, okay, well, let me wait till Katie comes back downstairs and let me talk to her about it, because I don't know like how much sugar you've had or whatever the thing was. And he goes, well, I don't want Katie to know about it. And I said, why? Why don't you want Katie to know about it? She said, because she might tell me I can't have it. And I said, well, if it wasn't best for you to have it, then why should you have it? And he was like, well, I shouldn't. And I was like, so do you just want to go with what you want, or do you actually want what's best? And he's like, well, I want what's best. And I said, so should we talk to Katie about it? He's like, yeah. I didn't go, how dare you? You should never lie to your mother or some bullshit like that. Like, I just gave him some more explanation. And he may not have agreed with me. He may still have thought, well, no, I really want it, so I should. But every time I've seen a point, and it's only a few times that's come up something like that, where he wants to hide something, I always just tell him, wouldn't it be better for you to talk to us about it? And so a few times in the recent past, he'll do this thing where he'll say, he'll be like, I want something, or he'll say like, hey, can you, like, we have this pantry where it's above like the granite countertop, and it's like these doors that open up, and it's sort of a pantry. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about because you've been here, but it's like, that pantry, right? So he can't really reach everything in there. He can get up there and reach into it, but sometimes he'll ask me to help him get something, right? And he asked me for something the other day. I forget what it was, or no, he didn't tell me what it was. He said, can you come over here to the cabinet? I said, why do you want me to come over? He said, I want you to get something for me. And I go, well, what do you want? What do you want me to get? And he goes, I'm not telling you. And I said, okay, well, but if you don't tell me, how can I get it? And he goes, oh, okay, well, I want whatever it was. So there's like these little programs that come up that I know it's something I did, so I'm not judging him for whenever he says something or does something that's not particularly best or whatever, because I know it came from somewhere. It maybe wasn't even something that I actually did in his presence. It could just be something he got genetically as a program, right? So I'm patient with that point of realizing, okay, was there ever a time that I ever lied to my parents or didn't want them to know something? Fuck yeah, there was. But I knew as a kid they weren't even gonna explain anything to me. It was just gonna be no. And so with Max, I don't expect him, like, in the sense of forcing him to always tell me everything or whatever, but I'm always suggesting to him, it's okay if you do. Just because you tell me doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to say yes or no. And if I do say no, I'm going to explain to you why, so you can understand. So there's no, you need to comply immediately. The only time that would be is if it's a literal danger situation where it's going to create a consequence that's not acceptable. You see what I mean? So we're not stupid about it where he's about to stab somebody and I'm like, well, don't do that, Max. Hold on. Let me explain to you. It's like, wait, no, grab the scissors, in that particular context, right? But generally speaking, the point is, so we're always educating all the time. Our approach within teaching him about electronic circuits is no different than our approach to, should we have a cookie right before bedtime or something like that? It's the same approach. It's explanation, asking questions, see what he understands, explain context when he doesn't have it. Because why you understand why he shouldn't have a cookie. right before bed. But why does he understand that?
Hang on.
And so isn't it natural if it tastes good, you're going to want it, right?
Yeah.
But is that how you should decide what you eat?
Oh shit.
No.
You see? Now I know in my life I've made decisions like that many times where it's like I go with what I want rather than what's actually best for me. And there's consequences to that.
Yeah.
But now as an adult, I'm having to reteach myself and relearn. That's part of the journey to life. The process that we've been talking about with destiny, all that stuff, is reteaching yourself. Okay, that's not the best way to make a decision. Now, if it's not going to be a problem for you, then you can go with your preference. But preference shouldn't go over the principle of what's best for all. And so that's something that we're constantly explaining to our children and giving them the opportunity to understand, rather than assuming they already know it, especially knowing that when I was a kid, I didn't base things on that, So there's our environment, which is already a frame of reference, which says just go with your preference all the time. Do whatever feels good. And then we're constantly reinforcing that. And then now you have entire movements like spirituality and stuff that literally deifies the concept of just doing what feels good, doing what makes you happy. But they don't take it to the logical conclusion, which is, what if a murderer gets bliss from that?
Yeah.
Because you don't know what they're feeling and experiencing inside when they do that. But wouldn't you agree, like, that's not acceptable?
Right.
You're not allowed to feel good from that. And it's not that you're even not allowed to feel good. You're not allowed to act on it.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable. And if you can take responsibility for yourself and realign, well, what if you could take responsibility and say, this doesn't give me pleasure anymore. This gives me pleasure, doing what's best. But you agree you have to physically rewire what's going on in here. That's why we're always bringing things back to the point of the physical. Anytime I hear anybody, even if it's you guys, or I even do it myself, I'll correct myself of where it's more like a stylistic approach. Do you see what I mean? Or, well, you just have to approach it from this perspective. It's like, it's not the perspective that's the key. It's the physical wiring, because it needs to be automatic.
Yeah.
You start with the perspective. But if you don't have the tools to integrate in a physical way and change it at the physical level, and you're not even taking that approach, the perspective approach is never going to change anything. And that's also why the positive thinking never works, because you're only just telling yourself to be positive. You're not ever actually just being positive. Because if you were actually just able to do that, why wouldn't you just feel good with only things that are best? Wouldn't you be able to take full responsibility for what makes you feel good or not? It would be, I do what's best and then I feel good as a result. You can look at for your own life, where you can see the consequences of just going with what feels good, and the long-term consequence. And that's what our society is doing, is everyone's just looking for that convenience, that quick thing, whatever is the cheapest. No one's really looking at it from the perspective of what's actually best for everybody. So that's the individual part. The individual has to take self-responsibility to realign themselves to what's best. And then then we have to look at collectively what is best. So if every individual was doing that, well, that still wouldn't put food on our tables. Yeah. Because if I have to think all day long about where I'm going to get food as an individual, and I'm only taking responsibility in that, I mean, think about it. Would you have a computer? Who's making the computers? No one would even have time to do something like that. So collectively, we should have an agreement that we're going to have systems that make sure everybody has enough food. We already have the systems to do that. Right? But now we're starting to experience the consequence of not really considering everything, because there was some storms, I think here in Texas, Katie was telling me about, where a bunch of grain silos got destroyed or something's going on there. And now they're like, oh shit, we're not going to have enough food or whatever the thing is, So again, the problem is, if we allow society to collapse, this was a huge realization for me even recently, and Avery brought this up recently. And it's like something that I kind of took for granted as knowing, but now it's like I'm really seeing, especially in the context of everything that's happening, because you even see this on the positive thinking side, the law of attraction, spirituality side of things, where people are like, just let the system collapse. We'll rebuild something in its ashes. Because you have this whole phoenix rising from the ashes idea, right? Okay. If you throw a bird into a fire, guess what happens?
It
It
dies.
dies.
There ain't no fucking thing coming out of it.
Yeah, phoenixes aren't real.
It's not. That's a
It's like
mythological thing.
the One Day in Maine book. It's like the same thing.
So if we let our civilization actually collapse to the point where, you know what I mean? Like there's no food distribution at all. I mean, that's what I mean by collapse. That stuff requires people to go to work. If everybody loses, I'm going to use the word faith loosely. But if everyone loses faith in society as a thing, no one goes to work anymore.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to suddenly, we're just going to be, oh, let me cooperate. Let me be your friend. We're not already doing that. That's why we have the society we have.
Wow.
So we're going to have to rebuild. And so if it takes you 7, 14, 20 years to rebuild yourself, that might seem like a lot, yeah? But how long would it take to rebuild our civilization if it collapses? Our society?
Hundreds or thousands of years.
Yeah.
I think we might have touched on this in the last podcast. I don't remember if we did or not. Talked about it somewhere. The last time that happened was like when Jesus was here. Okay? And I'm not trying to say Jesus was some super savior, super saiyan coming here to save everybody. He was a person that was talking about the principles of give as you want to receive. That's
Definitely
exactly what we're talking about.
Blonde hair though when he got angry.
Yeah, well, some people think he had blonde hair all the time.
And blue eyes.
Blue eyes, right. But my point is not to belittle the point. It's just to say he's a human being, okay, who was here on the earth, okay? Whether he was actually born from a virgin or not, the point is he was here explaining we should live from certain principles. That part got missed. It got turned into be a nice person.
And eat this bread.
Well, and then there's all the other weird satanic shit that got put into it as well.
Yeah.
But even the parts of his principles where give as you want to receive, that kind of stuff got turned into just on an individual basis, be a nice, loving person. But that's a low vocabulary interpretation of what he was really saying. Because the high vocabulary interpretation would be, we need a system that makes sure everybody has what they need. Otherwise, what's going to happen is people are going to lose faith in the system. They're not going to get what they need. They're going to revolt. Everything's going to collapse. And that's what happened to the Roman society, because that's the context of when Jesus was alive, was back in the context where Rome was the empire. And it was already at that point falling apart, and then it eventually fell apart. And then the next major historical period after that was the Dark Ages, where they had to re-fucking invent science, which took hundreds of years, thousands of years to get back to where we are now. So if we have to do that all over again, it may not ever come back. You know, it may not ever come back. Everything is so interconnected now. Do you see the difference? Back then, it wasn't as interconnected. One thing could collapse and then the other societies could start to grow up and all this other stuff. That's not going to happen again. Everything is like one thing now. It's all going to go, right? And when you start looking into, Katie was just telling me about this credit card thing in Africa. Have you guys heard about this?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
they're testing out this new system that's like basically, it's like the credit card's in your hand. It's like a tattoo that you get. Yeah. And then it's supposed to have all your information on it as far as like all your banking information, or I don't know exactly.
And also your vaccines.
There you go. Yeah.
And so part of it is to get the vaccine linked with your credit, which is your money and your identification and everything. Okay.
Oh, fuck.
Now, I'm not an anti-vaccine person. Okay. Which means if you understand the real meaning of the word vaccine, then you understand why I say that. But we can all agree when they started genetically modifying food, some of it can be cool, some of it may not be good.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, we don't really know what we're screwing with. Okay. And when you start screwing with your DNA, right, which is what an RNA vaccine is, it's like you're going in and you're putting in RNA into your body. Okay. Yeah. Which is what the virus also does, right? So it can replicate itself.
Which is also really interesting. Most people do not understand RNA at all.
But they taught us about it in biology.
Yeah. But then they want to argue that this isn't going to have any kind of effect on your DNA. Like, no, that's what RNA does. Like, it literally
Well,
is.
they're saying because your body, your DNA and the mechanisms have a built-in way of eventually getting rid of that RNA that was
It's already made
there.
the change, though.
Well, regardless of the argument, I know, and I agree with you, but the point is people can argue all day long about their specialized knowledge, but you could make the same argument about just your immune system generally. That your immune system itself should be able to just take in a virus or something and make the changes necessary itself. Why isn't that occurring? Because our immune systems have potentially been degraded over time by the food and the environment and the lack of nutritional value in the foods and all this stuff. So regardless of the vaccine point, it's a consequence of our bodies not being fully at full capacity. And a lot of that can be with things that are maybe even within our personal control in terms of things that we're accepting and allowing in terms of beliefs and so forth that could be causing problems as well in terms of dysfunction in the body. But my point is, can we really for sure predict what the outcome is going to be of that? We can't, right? And if we're creating a situation where literally to function in the economy, everybody has to get this vaccine, can you see how potentially that could create a consequence where a lot of people will get fucked? You see what I mean? And you're tying that to your credit, your money, and you're tying that to your identity, and you're putting all those together. Can you see how, I mean, I can't spell it out to everybody the detailed way, but I can see that this could be a major problem.
Yeah, that's like all those medicines that you see the commercials for is like, if you've ever taken XY troll or whatever, then you may be at risk of blah, 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 blah. There's a lawsuit for you where you can make millions of dollars, win millions of dollars, right? Well, imagine if everyone were taking, because that's a small group of people that have taken that drug, whatever it is, right? But then imagine if the entire population were taking that, and they're still making mistakes on that grand scale. They're going to
also their starting point is to make money.
Right.
Is to profit. So again, I'm not against the concept of having medicine and even vaccines, again, if you understand what that word really means. But when you have it in the hands of people who are by design the most ruthless people on the planet. And what's so fascinating to me is now it's become a political point where it's like, if you on the side of, if you're against Trump, you're totally for the vaccines, the face masks, the everything that the scientists are saying, even though they're not all agreeing and so forth, right? And again, I'm not making a judgment because I don't have all of the detailed knowledge to be able to say this particular thing that's being suggested is best or not. But I can see from a starting point, from a principle point, the starting point of the corporations that are producing the drugs, the vaccines, also our food, also our entertainment, also anything. Because we're in the economic system, which says profit is the most important part, not what's best for all, right? It's the overemphasis on that point instead of, no, we need to make it best. Then the consequence is going to be like, if McDonald's was in charge of our food supply. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so it's not that it's McDonald's per se is the root of all evil. It's just you can see what they've become with what they have, right? And they're doing it based on the consumer demand. They're doing it based on the desire for something as cheap as possible. So they're just doing what is being asked of them, really. They're meeting the demand. If nobody was demanding it, it wouldn't exist. So you can't fault them for that. But that's, again, a collective point. You see what I mean? We're trying to place the blame on that individual. It's not that individual. That individual is just, which is, McDonald's or whatever, is just doing what the collective is asking for. Bill Gates is doing what the collective is asking for. So people can say he's on this conspiracy and all this stuff. It may very well be he thinks he's doing the best thing for everybody. But why is it that we need one individual to make those decisions? You see what I mean? Why is it that one individual has to be the drive behind this whole thing? And why isn't it that we have collectively already a system where everybody's immune systems are operating at the full capacity, proper nutrition and everything. And we have a system where, let's say there's a deadly virus ravaging the population, we can all just stay home if that's the right thing to do, because you don't have to go to work. Instead, it's like, oh, fuck, not only that, we have to stay home. Now we're all screwed because we can't have any income and the economies are falling apart. So now we're having to have this debate. So whether we should open the economy so people can make money, or whether they should be staying home and, not being sick and all this stuff, we can't even really have a real conversation about it because we're totally split as a society about what reality is. But how is that any different than a child not understanding whether Santa Claus is real? Like, you don't even know what is real because from the very beginning of your entrance into this world, someone's been lying to you about how reality even works at a fundamental level. So, I mean, really, if you're telling your child that Santa Claus is a real thing, you're lying to them about reality. So then why would you get mad if Trump's lying to you or if Joe Biden's lying to
You say lying is bad. Bad people lie. Don't lie. Never lie.
you? And then you tell your child not to lie,
Yeah.
right? But why not? If it's preserving the magic of childhood, apparently it's okay. It's like, it's not about lying. It's about what's best. Is it best for your child to not understand how reality operates? You see what I mean?
Going back to that point, like what Mitchell was saying was like, yeah, look, we'll all have our specialized information, but it's like important that we could communicate. And what you're saying is like, yeah, everybody needs that base understanding of how the mind works and how the body operates. It's like, I was just thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, if we all use our laptop for something different, we have a computer programmer, we have somebody who uses their laptop for 3D printing, we have somebody who uses their laptop for Photoshop, for music editing. It's like, they all have to understand how a laptop works. But that's the part that I'm really glad you brought that up, because when me and Mitch were talking about that and you were like, yeah, but it's like, even if we learn that information, it's like people don't actually care to apply it in a context that would even be in your own best interest. Like, what should be in your best interest if you were smart, if you could see all the pieces, is doing what is best for all. And because we're not educated with those principles, then that doesn't come through. And the big fault of that is like, it ensures that you do not know how your laptop works. And so it's like, imagine to be a Photoshop editor, right? Like, to edit pictures. No one taught you how to work a laptop. They just said, push this button, and then when it opens up, hit this key, this key, this key, this key, this key, hit enter. That's like putting in the password. And then they're like, you'll see a purple thing, just click it and it'll open. That's like Photoshop. And then you can click on this button to upload a picture. It's like, you actually have no idea what the fuck you're doing, but you memorized the steps in order to get to this specific thing. So now you'll never understand how that relates to marketing, or how it relates to making an album cover so you can support other people who are making music or running this or that. It's like, you'll never understand fundamentally, if there's anything wrong with that program, how to fix it, what to do, update, anything like that. And that's how we're all experiencing ourselves, is like, we don't even understand how our computer works. We don't understand how our
we don't really understand how the economy works. People don't even understand that the Federal Reserve is not actually a part of the government, for example.
It's like private organization. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
And people will say like, oh, inflation. There's inflation. There's going to be inflation if you give everybody money. It's like, why does there have to be inflation? That's a collective agreement that has to happen. Like, there's collective things that we're doing. And you're making a great point, because if everybody had the basic literacy of how computers work, you see what I mean? Then you could do a lot more. But to clarify, how long does it take to develop the skill to be able to sculpt a sculpture like the David from Michelangelo?
Long time.
And if you're if you're developing, like, so in other words, if we say, well, nobody needs to have any specialization, well, then you'll never have that level of degree of skill. Now, is it possible, if you have, let's say, Techno Tutor, and you're developing your vocabulary from a younger age, that you could master a lot more things? I think so. So I'm not saying you can only have one degree of specialization, but my point is, some things take time to develop a mastery and a degree of real mastery within. And that's not something you can necessarily change. That's not spaced repetition. Because if you're repeating the same thing over and over, you're never advancing. And this is the problem with the myth of spaced repetition, is it's not about repeating the same thing. It's about doing the same activity of sculpting something, but every time you're getting better at it because you're getting to the next point and the next point. That's not, you're repeating the same sentence to yourself over and over and over until you can remember it. You see, those are two different things.
Yeah.
So the problem is people who've never really mastered anything will not know the difference because they never mastered anything. They don't know, right? So we want to develop everybody to an equal point of effective vocabulary with how reality works. Within that, we're already seeing with our children and other children, if you start from a young enough age and you have the right tools, what a child is capable of is way beyond what you even realize. So we don't need to limit things to, well, people can only be specialized in one thing, but at the same time, we don't want to project too much. We don't want to base things on, well, I believe everyone can master every single thing that exists on the planet. Like, oh, that's just magical thinking too, because there are space-time aspects to reality, right? But again, if we're not giving children the vocabulary of, you should always do what's best for all, and you should endeavor to find out what is best and not assume, then that would never be the collective expression. And again, we're coming to a point in reality where the individual is hurting so much that it's becoming untenable, because the individual is going to want to express that hurt and that suffering onto everybody else. And that's only going to create more fear and more hurt and more anxiety and all of these things. And we're just seeing that collectively. What I'm seeing is just the collective expression of what I experienced when I was 20 something years old, where I was just like, I'm not happy, man. My life is not working. Why am I always feeling anxiety? Why is my life not working? That's what our society collectively is experiencing right now. And it's kind of like, no matter who you are, even if you're Bill Gates, you're like, what the fuck is going on? Things are not working the way they were supposed to work anymore. So the top-down approach is going to say, how can we just control everybody? Because fuck, like, we just need to get everything under control. But that's not going to last, because it's only going to create more suffering. It's never going to create the individual experience of, okay, this is amazing. I love being here on this planet. It's only going to be an experience of, I just want to try to like hurt other people. And so that's what we're saying, is we need to equalize the individual level of everybody has what they need. Everybody has an effective vocabulary. Everybody has an effective ability to learn new things and cooperate, and understands that doing what's best for all is the best way to live. And that should be the starting point of everything that we do and everything that we consider. And so again, we can't blame any individuals. We have to take responsibility as individuals, and then in a collective way support everyone individually, if that makes sense. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so some of it is system level, but it shouldn't be system level of only just controlling, because that's all I'm seeing right now, the top-down approaches. And that's because the people at the top, they don't understand what we're talking about. It's not a part of the vocabulary. They've been so specialized in just participate in the money system, gain as much, profit as much, control as much. And so this perspective that we're bringing forward is truly it's the right time for it, right? And it's nothing new. It's just, now we have to really apply, okay, what is best for everybody? How can we bring everybody up to a level where we don't have to control as much, because people can be trusted, but not just because we want to trust them, but because they actually have the understanding of basic reality, and they have a level of competence where they can interact in our world and contribute and get from, and receive from the systems in a way where they're not taking too much in a sense of like egotistically. They're able to receive what they need and not feel like we have to take too much, but that's already occurring. That's what the 1% are doing. They're already taking too much. So there may have to be some kind of balancing. But that's why we always come back to the point of, really, we're looking for people who want to step up and take individual responsibility to be able to create systems so that collectively everybody can have what they need. That's what we're missing. What else do you guys want to add to that?
The foundation being the foundation of all the problems comes back to education. That's with if you don't see that with clarity, then you have to get into these groups, get into the self-perfected group, start studying this stuff, because if you understand that, then you'll understand why you're having the same problems that you had a year ago. It's because you don't know how to create yourself as something new to get a new result. And that's what we're really talking about, is what Cameron was saying, is that we need to start rebuilding ourselves as individuals, because this whole let society collapse and rebuild is a really good point. Phoenix Rising is a myth. That's hilarious. Like, I never really, took that into account. It's like, it's just a concept. Not all concepts equate perfectly to reality. And so what we're really talking about is foundationally equal education, and equal not meaning that we bring everybody to 70%, because that means we have to take the people who are at 100% down to 70, and then the people
not equal to what the current schooling system produces.
The only way you can actually have real equality is everything is best, right? Because that way everybody goes up. And so with that being said, baby, at the end of the day, it comes back to application. Right, Mitch?
Of course. That's what this is about. It's about actually living it, right? Because like, how much have we all listened to podcasts, or you do some course, or you read some book, and nothing changes? And so that's what we're really about. So for those of you who have watched through to this point or listened through to this point, take the step, reach out. So we got 2 places we want to send you to. First is the Self-Perfected website, self-perfected.com. And there you can join the Facebook group. You can find more resources on what we're about, more merch to come.
For those on the
And
video,
the
you're
other
seeing a really
is
cool shirt, which I love.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you guys made these. They're so cool.
Oh, yeah.
Show the back.
We have a lot more in the pipeline.
Oh, here,
Yeah.
Drake, can you do it? Drake's a better model than me.
For those who can't see the video, I will read it to you. Perfect yourself before you wreck yourself. And that's both as an individual and as the collective, because we are on track to wreck ourselves bad, to the point where the world as we see it is not going to be recognizable. And we're seeing this more and more every single day. So time to step up, everybody. The other place I want to send you to is TechnoTutor's website. So it's techno, TECHNO tutor, TUTOR.com/contact. And you can reach out and you'll be put in contact with someone in your area so you can actually see what this is about. Because this is fundamentally different than any other education out there. We have the solution to the world's problems, and you really ought to join us now rather than later. Because every day that you don't actually reach out and apply this stuff, there's consequence to yourself, to your community. If you got kids, if you got friends, unless you step up, you're going to keep creating the same BS. So let's step up, everybody.
So if you go to the Self-Perfected group, we talk about that in one of the basics: second order consequence, third order consequence. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. One thing I wanted to mention before is I never really thought about the mechanism of just, this is the extended play, the encore. I never really thought about that point of why parents, or not parents, but just everybody is like, don't tell anybody your wish because then it won't come true. Like, why would that be a thing?
It's just weird superstition. It's just weird superstition.
The only way it would make sense is because if the kid tells the parent what they want, then the parent would have to get it for them.
Yeah.
Versus if the kid doesn't get it, they could just be like, the fairy didn't come, and the parent would be like, oh, that's so weird. Like, maybe they're sick and all that.
It's
shit.
like parents abdicating. Yeah, it's parents abdicating responsibility for actually having to
wait,
get the kid what they want.
I didn't hear that you wanted a bike. I can't afford that shit. You can't have.
No, you said it, so
PS5.
I'm not gonna get it for you.
Yeah, it's not going to come true now. Oh my god.
Oh, bummer.
You wanted a PlayStation 5? Ah, man. No, that's funny.
It's also programming you with the idea that if you wish for something hard enough, it'll happen.
Yeah.
Which is what people do about their salvation.
Yeah.
Right? They just think if they wish for it and they hope for it enough, it'll come true. But they don't look at the actual mechanics of it. They just want to wish it. Right? Meanwhile, what you're actually physically participating in is having a real consequence in this world, as we're seeing right now. and it's only going to get worse. That's the shitty thing about it. There's no, it could get better if we do something. Okay. So it doesn't have to get worse. It's just a matter of how much pain and suffering we as humanity need to experience before people are willing to wake up. I'm not willing to experience anymore. I want to do something about it. That's why we're doing this. Right. So,
but if you put like, if you have a, you know, a bathtub of water and you put like a little Kool-Aid pack of sugar, the water's not going to taste any different. You need a lot of Kool-Aid to change that water.
I was wondering where we were going with this. I'm like, Kool-Aid
Drink
in
the-
the
so
bathtub.
we have,
Yeah.
what we're saying is we have lots of Kool-Aid.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're-
Come drink it.
Take Kool-Aid. We should sell self-perfected Kool-Aid. That would be
Drink the Kool-Aid.
Self-perfected Kool-Aid coming
That's
soon.
great.
They're called Kool-Aid.
Well, thanks
with a
everyone
K.
for
Energy
watching.
drink.
This was fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got
Thanks,
a
guys.
lot more in store, everyone.
See ya.
See ya.
Peace.